Hello everyone, welcome to What If Saitama Got Teleported to Attack on Titan Part 2. Before we start, please go support Gordon Ramses for writing that awesome fanfic. Chapter 11. Levi let out a short sigh of relief as he soared through the forest of giant trees. He looked to his right to see Saitama hover beside him. Any normal man would have been greatly confused and shocked. But not him. For he had seen what Saitama was capable of. The way he defeated those titans, it was inhuman. Levi wasn't the type of guy to put his faith into others, with the exception of Commander Erwin. But Saitama had changed his opinion. He fully trusted the capability's capabilities. He knew that he was the key to humanity's survival. "Saitama," Levi said, getting Saitama's attention. "How's the brat?" he asked. Saitama shrugged as he turned his head to look at Annie, who he had been holding for a couple of minutes now in his iron grip. "I think she's okay," Saitama replied. "Are you okay?" he asked Annie. "Let me go, you bald-headed freak," Annie sneered at him, making Saitama shush her. "You are in big trouble, young lady," he said harshly, glaring at her. "Back where I come from, they would have sent S-class heroes after you. Heck, even Genos would have come after you himself." "Genos?" Levi asked, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. "And who might that be?" "Oh," Saitama said, looking at Levi. "Genos is my disciple. Well, he just told me he wanted to become my disciple after I helped him defeat this mosquito monster that was attacking the city. He's been my disciple for quite some time now." He trailed off. "I wonder what he's up to." "If he's your disciple, then he must be as strong as you are," Levi stated. "Well, Genos is very strong. He can defeat those titans with ease, to be honest. He's fast, strong, and has a strong core, I guess," Saitama replied. "Core? Don't you mean strong heart?" Levi asked. "Not really. Genos is a cyborg. He's more machine than man, but he's really nice once you get to know him better. He talks a lot, but I can see why he wants to become stronger," Saitama replied. "And why is that?" Levin asked, curiosity clearly present in his voice as he shot his 3D maneuver gear cables at another tree. "And what the hell is a cyborg?" "I feel like you should ask him that yourself, should you ever get the chance to meet him," Saitama replied. "How long until we meet up with the others? My suit is still dirty and I really want to clean it," he said. It was then that Saitama noticed a piece of cloth around Levi's neck. "Hey, can I use that napkin around your neck to clean my suit?" he asked. "Why, what?" Levi asked, looking too at his cravat. "Are you talking about my cravat?" he asked. "Yes," Saitama replied, reaching out for it. "These stains will only get worse. It's better to clean them now." Levi slapped away Saitama's hand, glaring at him. "You are not using my cravat as your personal napkin," he said, his glaring intensifying. "As much as it pains me to say this, the stains will have to wait once we get back to the walls, got it?" "But they will only get worse," Saitama whined. "I know that," Levi replied, shaking his head. "But you'll have to wait. We have to take this brat back for interrogation," he said, his gaze shifting towards the Titan shifter that Saitama had thrown over his shoulder. "Well," Saitama replied, looking at Annie. "She's been biting my shoulder for 10 minutes. I think she must be hungry or something. Or does it work differently with Titan shifters? I mean, they're still titans and all, but I've not seen Eren eat anyone. And Annie hasn't eaten anyone either. But she killed." Levi grimly reminded him, glaring at Annie with rage-filled eyes. "I'll cut off her arms and let them regrow, just so I can cut them off again. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to torture her day in day out if it's the last thing I'll ever do." Saitama looked back at Annie, who had begun chomping down on his shoulder again. "Could you stop that? You're going to damage my suit," Saitama said in a slightly irritated voice. "Also, torture isn't going to help anyone." "Go to hell, you bastard, just wait until I get free, then I won't be holding back," Annie retorted, glaring at him intensely. "Oh, so you were holding back?" Levi asked, a small smirk appearing on his face. "If it weren't for the fact we're retreating, I would have ordered Saitama to drop you. Right here, right now. Then you could go all out against him. And don't think I won't be joining in on all the fun. I would cut you open just like I did before. And Saitama would just beat the shit out of you. Just like did before." "You have a lot of faith in this bold bastard, Captain Levi," Annie hissed at him. "I'm done talking, brat," was Levi's sharp reply as he turned his gaze forward. "We'll be reaching the rendezvous point within a few minutes from now. After that we'll put this brat into cuffs and we'll be on our way home." Home? Saitama thought to himself. This isn't my home. Even though he did not show it, Saitama truly missed his home. He missed his Uden, his TV, his Futen, and he even missed Genos. When he and Genos first met, he did not think his acceptance of him becoming his disciple through. He was reluctant at first, but eventually he did start to train him in a way. As much as he hated to admit it, Genos was trying a bit too hard to become stronger. Now Saitama is no stranger to having as much power as possible, but he did not want Genos to follow all of the steps he had taken. Genos was still young and naive, but he also had a big heart. Or core. Or whatever it is that keeps blood or oil coursing through his body. Genos was his disciple. Genos was his friend. And the more time they spent together, the more Saitama began to realize that he reminded him of himself when he was young. Wanting to do the right thing, to bring justice to the ones that deserve it the most. But Genos was mostly in it for something Saitama is not fond of. Not the slightest. Revenge. Revenge on the cyborg that killed his family and destroyed his hometown. It was something Saitama was not fond of, revenge that is. And while it's true that whoever did this to Genos deserves to be punished, it does not mean that Genos should waste his life trying to become stronger just so that he can defeat this adversary. Genos might have been dying, in fact that was the reason he became a cyborg in the first place, but he was still just a kid kind of. He might be 19 years old, but he was 15 at the time when the cyborg attacked and destroyed his hometown. It must have been very hard for him. So, in a way, him and Saitama became something more than just master and disciple. Hey, Boldy, did you hear what I said? Saitama was shaken out of his thoughts by Levi, who was staring at him with a curious look. No, Saitama replied. I kind of spaced out for a moment. Levi's staring continued, though his gaze softened. You did good out here, Saitama. He said, a very small but genuine smile appearing on his face. For someone being on their first expedition, you handled pretty well. As for my squad, I don't know what might have happened to them had we not interfered. They are capable of handling themselves, of that I am certain, but this brat, he said, glaring at Annie once again. Killed a lot of soldiers who I thought to be experienced. There is no doubt that the outcome could have been different had we not intervened. I guess so. Saitama trailed off. Levi looked at him with a confused look. Is something bothering you? He asked. Nope, not at all. Saitama replied. Levi shook his head. You told me you were a hero, right? He asked. I am a hero, yes. Saitama replied. And why do you see yourself as one? Because you saved a couple of lives. I did too, and they don't call me a hero. Even Eren saved countless of lives by sealing the breach, but do they call him a hero? No. So why do you call yourself a hero, Saitama? Levi asked, raising an eyebrow at the Cape Boldy. I don't call myself a hero. I am a hero. I am part of the Hero Association. I am a hero. Saitama retorted, getting slightly annoyed. Being a hero isn't some kind of job, Levi retorted. You will be seen as a hero because of your actions. Now I won't be surprised if even Erwin calls you a hero. He'll most likely call you an acceptable soldier, but you did good in my opinion. Just don't let it get to your head, okay? But I'm not letting it get to my head. I am a hero. I'm in the Hero Association system, Saitama retorted, completely forgetting the fact that he was no longer in City Z. Their arguing continued for a little while more. Much to Annie's amusement. At least one thing was for sure. Saitama was a complete idiot. The members of the Special Operations Squad could only stare at one another as they tendered their horses at the rendezvous point. There were no words that could describe what they were feeling at the moment. What they had just witnessed could never be forgotten. It could never be erased. What Saitama did out there was inhuman. The way he blocked the incoming attack from the female titan. How he simply stared at it with that monotone stare of his. He did not even flinch when the female titan threw that punch at him. He simply blocked it. I can't believe it. Alu muttered, shaking his head as he laughed nervously. It must have been my imagination. Secretly Captain Levi just did something to stop that female titan from attacking, right? I don't know what to believe anymore. Gunther replied, shaking his head as well. I mean, I heard the stories. And even though the captain told us the stories were true, I was still skeptical. But now that I've seen it with my own eyes, there's no doubt about it. Eld sighed, running his hand through his hair. The guy he just stopped the attack with his bare hand. How was he able to do such a thing? What the hell is he? He can't be human. It doesn't make any sense. He muttered to himself. Suddenly the squad overheard a conversation between two recruits. Hey, were you there when Saitama defeated all of those titans? One of them asked. Yeah, the other replied. I heard he tossed them around like they were made out of paper. Like, how the hell is he able to do that? He freaking annihilated those titans, and they did not even put a scratch on him, man. He didn't even flinch when he jumped down right in the middle of a group of 8 titans. And did you see the way he was looking at them? Absolutely no emotion whatsoever. Like the guy gave zero shits about them. It was almost like he knew he wasn't going to lose. Alu lowered his head in shame. I guess I owe him an apology. He said, muttering to himself. We owe him a lot more than just an apology. Gunther corrected. Defeated 8 titans, plus the female titan. Eld commented. Now just hold on, Petra intertwined. Captain Levi was with him as well. He might have helped or even defeated the female titan. Or perhaps he helped Saitama defeat it. They must have defeated it together. Does it even matter? Gunther asked, raising an eyebrow at her. All that matters is that the female titan is defeated. We don't know that for sure. Came the voice of Eren. The hell are you talking about, Eren? Gunther asked in confusion. I mean, haven't you just heard what those two recruits were talking about? Saitama defeated 8 titans with his bare hands. We might not have been there to see the fight, but I sure as hell know that the female titan has been defeated. There is no way Captain Levi would lose to that thing. Petra let out a sigh as she stared off at the forest of giant trees. She could not believe what had just happened. Ever since she met Saitama, something had changed. She couldn't quite put her finger around it, but something had changed. Perhaps it was the way he acted. He was always so relaxed, not really caring about anything. But nevertheless, she enjoyed the talks they shared together. He was a different kind of guy. She knew that from the get-go. But she never expected this. In a way, Saitama frightened her a bit. He was human, yes. But he seemed to lack emotions. He wasn't nervous when exiting the safety of the walls and venturing into the dangerous outside world. He wasn't scared when he saw the first titan appear. And he did not even flinch during the time with the female titan. It just didn't seem human to her. But still, she enjoyed the time they spent together. Even her squad mates had begun to worry about her, telling her to lay back a little while and watch from distance. But even so, Captain Levi seems very fond of the guy. He even viewed him as more experienced to handle the female titan than his own squad. But why? They had been a squad for so long, and the amount of time they spent together only strengthened their bond. So why would he make the harsh decision of ordering them to leave? To retreat? To straight up abandon their leader? She didn't understand. It was then that she caught a glimpse of something. It looked like a giant cloud of dust, and she could see the outline of a person in the middle of it. Her eyes widened when the cloud became bigger and bigger. Thinking it was a titan, she drew her blades. She sheathed them, however, when she caught a full glimpse of who was inside the cloud of dust. It was Saitama. And he was carrying Levi and another soldier on his back. What? Within seconds, Saitama appeared in front of her, startling not only her but the entire squad. He placed down Levi, who struggled to stand straight, grabbing hold of a nearby support wagon or support. Hi, Saitama greeted her. Do me a favor and tie her up. But be careful, she bites. He said as he threw Annie off his shoulder and into Petra's arms. Annie tried to get up but was instantly pushed to the ground by Levi, who grabbed hold of her and placed her in a neck hold. Head over here. Meet the female titan. Levi said. Everyone looked at the girl in shock, but the one who was the most shocked was none other than Eren Yeager himself. That was Annie. Annie Leonhardt. One of the many people he met in boot camp. She was in the top 10. And she was a shifter. No, that couldn't be true. Annie Leonhardt was not the female titan. It had to be some kind of sick joke. Annie, what are you? This has to be. Eren stuttered, his hands shaking as he looked down at Annie. Gunther, Alu, get Eren to his horse. Eld, inform Erwin that we're ready to move out. Levi ordered his men, who all saluted and did as they were ordered. Levi then proceeded to pick up Annie and throw her into a nearby wagon, which was filled with the corpses of deceased soldiers that were all wrapped in white blankets. He glared at her, and he ordered Petra and 2 other soldiers to stay with her in the wagon and keep a watchful eye on her at all costs. Do you realize half of these soldiers are dead because of you? Petra asked as the wagon suddenly began to move. How could you do this? You're human, so why the hell would you kill your own? Are you sick in the head, or are you fighting for the Titans? What the hell is wrong with you? Petra shouted, her voice filled with pure anger and hatred towards this young girl, if she could even be called a girl. This girl was a monster. She killed without remorse, and she did not even look at the blankets. She just stared off at the distance, as if she was waiting for something. I hope they execute her. One of the soldiers in the wagon said, glaring at Annie. If it were up to me, I would have killed her already. I can't believe you would betray your own kind. Yeah, the other one added. They should kill you, right here, right now. Petra let out a sigh as she looked down at her hands. She just wanted to go home, inside the safety of the walls. She thought this expedition would be a turning point for humanity. And in a way it was, but still. Her head shot up when she suddenly felt someone tugging at her arm. She turned her head only to see Saitama running beside the wagon she was sitting in. Not even slightly amazed at his speed, Petra forced a smile and spoke up. How are you feeling, Saitama? She asked, trying to lighten up the mood. Okay, I guess. I mean, we captured her, he said, pointing his index finger at Annie. But how are you feeling? You don't look so good. You're getting a little green. Petra was about to reply, but the only thing that came out of her mouth was the lunch she had a couple of hours ago. The inside of her stomach now stained Saitama's suit, making the hero flinch as he wiped the disgusting substance of his already dirty suit. Great, Saitama said, sarcasm dripping from his voice. I'm going to need a lot of napkins to get this out. And I'm guessing you guys don't have a dryer anywhere around in HQ, right? That's just great. My suit is ruined. Petra bushed furiously as she hid her face in her palms. What the hell? That had only happened on her first 2 expeditions, she never vomited after her first 2, so why the hell did she have to do it now? And the fact that she vomited on humanity's savior made things even worse, he probably hated her guts right now. And for good reasons. If it was the other way around, she would have slapped him across the face multiple times. She just hoped Saitama didn't share the same thoughts as she did. Did you eat something you're not supposed to eat? Saitama asked, snapping Petra out of her thoughts. She reluctantly gathered the courage to turn her head and face him. His face showed no signs of anger, but she was still a bit skeptical. But still something about his look made her feel a bit safer. At least he wasn't angry with her, or was this just the beginning? Was he trying to act all nice to her and then make a sassy remark when she least expects it? Levi sometimes did that and she hated it. You're not going to throw up again, are you? Saitama asked, taking a few steps away from the wagon. I'm surprised your vomit was able to hit me, seeing as we're moving at a pretty fast pace. But I guess wind resistance is just a myth then. You're not angry? I mean, I'm happy you're so calm about this, but still. Petra trailed off. Oh, I'm a bit aggravated, but not angry. It smells pretty bad, but I'll just have to hold my breath. Saitama replied. Petra let out a sigh before wiping her mouth with her sleeve. Sorry. I just felt like I'm sorry, it's all just too much. Oh, why is that? Saitama asked. Never mind, Saitama. I just want to go home and take a long, relaxing bath. She said, leaning back into the wagon. I promise I'll make it up to you. For vomiting on your suit, that is. Before the hero could reply, Gunther interrupted them. Hey you two, I get you're trying to bond with one another, but we've got bigger problems, he shouted as he pointed his thumb over his shoulder. We've got 4 titans on our asses and they are not giving up. Both Saitama and Petra looked behind them. Petra's eyes widened while Saitama just deadpanned as he came to a halt. He casually held up his hand to his chest and waved at Petra. He turned around and started sprinting towards the titans. Petra let out a long sigh before she turned her attention back to Annie. For some reason she did not feel the need to watch as Saitama kicked titan ass. She just wanted to get over with it and go home. She was going to visit her father. Yeah, she was going to enjoy her day off. Yeah, look at him go get them, Saitama. Petra heard the voice of Eld and Irin yell simultaneously. She shook her head and took one quick glance behind her, only to see Saitama grabbing a titan by its legs and using it as some kind of club to smash the other titans. She could not help but chuckle to herself. It all seemed too easy. The latest expedition resulted in a lot of casualties and they gained almost nothing from it. But now it all seemed too easy. Heck, she wouldn't be surprised if some genius came up with a plan to send Saitama out to the Shingishina district on his own. Within mere seconds the titans were all defeated and Saitama reached the wagon a few seconds later. The vomit dried up. He commented, looking at Petra. Petra resisted the urge to smack herself on her head. Nice work out there, sir, one of the soldiers in the wagon said. The way you handled those titans was simply breathtaking. Thanks. Saitama replied. I wouldn't be surprised if you got promoted to the rank of captain. Heck, even some veteran soldiers like Captain Levi and squad leader Mike could learn a few things from you, the soldier said, completely obvious to the fact there was a member of the Levi squad sitting in the same wagon as them. Petra leaned back against the wagon and closed her eyes. She wanted rest and nothing more. It had been a grueling 2 hours before the column had finally reached the walls. The people of the Carinese district were surprised to see the Survey Corps had already returned this early. There were whispers that their mission was a complete failure if only they knew what they had just accomplished. First things first, however. They needed to get Annie Leonhardt into custody. The military police would have probably been the best choice, but Erwin decided to take her directly to the military police's prisons personally. Accompanied by Captain Levi and squad leader Hanji, they made their way towards the military police's prison block, awaiting their judgment. The mission was a success, and it was all because of Saitama. Had he not intervened, the outcome would have been a lot different. But even so, now was the time to celebrate. And nighttime had arrived shortly and everyone was enjoying themselves, drinking at some local bars and eating at restaurants. Some were drinking away their sorrow, others enjoying the taste of something different than only water. Even the Levi squad was enjoying themselves. Heck, even Levi seemed to enjoy himself a little bit. Occasionally getting into talks with several recruits and veterans alike. Petra, however, was not feeling so good. She had visited her father and he asked her about the letter she had sent him. He said that he thought her to be too young to be thinking of marriage. But she quickly dismissed her father's claims, stating that she's old enough to make her own decisions. And that's when her father asked the question she hated to answer. How many? How many lives were lost on this damned expedition? Too many, she would always reply. But in truth this expedition probably had the least casualties. And it was because of one man. And that man had changed her view on life bit by bit. It just goes to show that when you pray hard enough, your prayers will be answered. Every time she returned from another expedition, she would thank her guardian angel for keeping her safe. For protecting her. But it seemed that everyone had received a new guardian angel. And as much as some hated to admit it, Saitama was humanity's last line of defense. Herein might be the key to figuring out the Titan's secrets, but Saitama is like the bullet of a gun. When the trigger is pulled the bullet comes out and destroys everything in its path. But then again Saitama was no ordinary bullet. He disobeyed orders, he did not care about the situation. He was unstoppable. Surely even he has his limits, Petra said to herself. I mean, a life without limitations sound pretty boring. What are you jabbering about, Petra? Gunther asked, taking a sip from his drink. Come on, lighten up a little. We live to fight another day for crying out loud. Just let her be, Alu intertwined, smirking. She's just sad because Saitama decided to decline her generous offer of having a drink with her. Petra shot him a cold glare as a reply before speaking up. I just asked him if he wanted to join us. I never asked him to have a drink with me. Now would you please stuff your mouth with whatever it is you're drinking and shut up? She asked, clearly irritated. Alu stared at her in confusion, but decided to let it pass. She was acting differently ever since they returned from the expedition, but he didn't really pay much attention to it. He looked at Gunther and laughed, raising his glass. To our next victory they both shouted in union. The victory. Petra mumbled underneath her breath. Just as she was about to excuse herself, she noticed a familiar-looking man walk by. She initially thought her eyes were deceiving her, but it was him. Saitama. This time actually excusing herself, she quickly stormed out of the bar and ran after Saitama. Saitama had reached a nearby pond and was sitting cross-legged in front of it, looking down at the water as several fish swam by. Petra stopped to observe him, but gathered courage to walk up to him and sit beside him. An awkward silence befell the two before Saitama broke the silence. It's not polite to follow people. He said, not taking his eyes off the pond. Petra laughed nervously, fiddling with her hair while doing so. She looked at Saitama and let out a sigh. You know, she said, looking at the pond. You were amazing out there. Sorry if I sounded a little harsh, but I just wanted it to be over, you know. I hope you can forgive me. Why should I forgive you? Saitama asked, making her flinch. I mean, I never thought you did anything wrong. The vomiting thing was an accident and my suit has been cleaned up. Yeah, I can see that. Petra replied. Who cleaned it? You? Well, I was going to, but then Levi stopped me and told me I had no idea what I was doing and that a toddler could clean better than me. Where are you getting at? Petra asked. He cleaned it for me. Also wore some kind of skirt pretty weird. Saitama replied. Petra resisted the urge to burst out laughing, but could not hold it in. She laughed so loud that people actually turned their heads to see what the fuss was all about. Oh my, did he actually clean it for you? She asked, wiping her teary eyes. This is just amazing, I can't wait to tell the others about this. Oh, really? Petra's eyes widened as she heard the familiar monotone voice of her captain behind her. She quickly got up and saluted, but was dismissed by Levi. I see that Saitama spilled the beans, correct? Petra nodded, but still had trouble trying to contain her laughter. Well, I did clean it for him, I did it with good reason. A toddler could clean his suit faster and better than he could. He might be able to put up a fight, but when it comes to cleaning, he is as weak as they get. He said, taking a seat beside Saitama. But even so, he did good out there. You definitely achieved more than the whole Survey Corps initially thought. You should be proud of yourself, Saitama. I know a lot of us are. Rumors are even spreading about having descent from the heavens itself. What a load of bullshit. By the way, Saitama. Petra said, getting the hero to look at her. How did you become as strong as you are now? Yeah, Levi said, looking at him with curious-filled eyes. I've been wondering about that too. Oh, Saitama said, turning his attention back at the pond and the fish. I just trained really hard for 3 whole years. 100 sit-ups, 100 push-ups, 100 squats and then a 10-kilometer run. Oh, and don't use air conditioning or your heater to strengthen your spirit. You're bucking with us, right? Levi asked, raising an eyebrow. You lost me at 100 sit-ups. No way in hell you can become that strong by doing just those basic exercises. But I did it every day for 3 whole years. Saitama retorted. It's not physically possible for a human to endure so much stress in their body. Your bones would break, your muscles would tense up and hurt too much. Your mind becomes unstable and you'll lose your sanity. You're not giving your muscles enough rest so they will keep heating up and it will keep hurting. You would have to take breaks between those exercises and . Okay, I get it, shorten it to 10 words or less next time. Sheesh, you're like Genos when I first met him. Saitama cut him off. Is Genos? Petra asked. His disciple. Levi replied. Oh, wow, that must mean he is as strong as you are, huh? Petra asked, causing Levi to shake his head. What? She asked her captain. Who could be stronger than the man who can defeat titans with his bare fists? Heck, some are already giving him nicknames like the Titan Slayer or Humanities Blade. I can't believe it. Humanities Blade sounds pretty good, though. Petra remarked, causing Levi to shrug. I don't know. Perhaps the caped Baldy is a better fit. Saitama's eyes widened as he looked at Levi with a shocked look. How do you know my hero name? He asked. What? Levi asked in confusion. How do you know the nickname I was given by the Hero Association, even though you have no idea what it is? Saitama asked. It was just my imagination showing off, Saitama. Give it a rest. You'll not be getting a nickname from me. To me you're still Saitama. And I won't give you any special treatment just because you can punch titans to death. That's a good thing, right? Saitama asked. That depends how much you get on my nerves. Levi replied. Am I getting on your nerves? Saitama asked. Not yet. Levi replied. Cool. Saitama replied. Levi cleared his throat before standing up. I'm heading to bed. Tomorrow we're going to see what that brat has in store for us. I suggest you get some rest too, both of you. Petra nodded her head, while Saitama just stared at Levi and gave him a two-fingered salute. Levi turned around and walked away from the two, leaving them to themselves once more. So, Petra said, twiddling with her thumbs. You like staring at ponds? Stupid question, Ral, stupid question. I like watching the fish swim. They're pretty neat. Also, it calms my mind and reminds me of home. Saitama replied, not taking his eyes off the pond. I see home. Petra replied. You know, I haven't really apologized to you, so, how about this? Tomorrow I'll introduce you to my parents. I already told them some things about you, and they really wanted to meet you in person. My mother is a great cook and she doesn't mind adding another plate to the table. She said, her expression softening and a sudden heat rising up her cheeks. So, what do you say? Saitama shrugged. I guess it wouldn't hurt. As long as it isn't stale bread and water. He replied. Petra smiled widely as she threw her arms into the air and exclaimed. Oh, thank you so much, I promise you won't be disappointed. Saitama reluctantly returned the gesture and also threw his arms up, albeit much slower and reluctant. Yay, I guess. Dinner is dinner. Petra nodded. That is correct. But still, it's going to be so much fun. Stiffing a yawn, Petra stretched her back and rubbed her eyes. I'm getting sleepy. I'm going to head home now. I look forward to tomorrow. She turned around, but not before giving Saitama a playful wink. Thanks for giving me some confidence, Baldy. Saitama watched as she turned around and waved him goodbye. He turned his attention to the pond. As much as he enjoyed his time here, he really missed his home. Chapter 12. Morning had arrived quicker than any member of the Survey Corps could have anticipated. The news that a Titan shifter had been caught spread like a wildfire, even reaching the ears of many inhabitants of Walsina, which was not supposed to happen, but MPs can't keep their mouths shut. Never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined the Survey Corps being this successful. What everyone did not know except for the members of the Survey Corps was that it was all thanks to one man. This man was their savior, and whether they liked it or not, would be the key to humanity's survival against a looming Titan threat. The fact that this man looked like your average citizen, except for his attire, made him even less recognizable as someone who can defeat titans with one punch. It didn't help that he was currently being led to the house of one of his teammates, who had agreed to spend a day with him, while also wanting to introduce him to her parents. Petra turned her head to Saitama and smiled. When she had asked Saitama to spend the day with her, he had reluctantly agreed, almost as if he had no idea how to answer such a simple question. Perhaps he was tired, or perhaps it was something else. Petra did not care, though. She just liked spending her free days with someone else than Alu, Gunther, Eld, and even Levi. She thought back to the many days she had spent with them, and she did enjoy their company. But getting to know Saitama better was crucial. She needed to get to know her squad mates better so she could rely on them. Not that she really needed to rely on Saitama, or rather the other way around, since he could easily take care of any Titan that dared to stand in his way. It was a scary thought at first, walking besides a man with enough power to wipe you off the face of the earth with a flick of his wrist. But after last night, when she had her talk with Saitama, she felt more at ease around him. He was a very kind man, even though he did not really show it. In a way, Saitama shared great resemblance to Captain Levi. His blank stare, the way he faced off against titans, he did not show any kinds of fear, just like her captain. But her captain would sometimes lose his cool, and that was something she had never seen Saitama do. He was always so calm and relaxed, as if he did not care about anything, unless it was of the utmost importance. It was the same thing when they exited the walls yesterday morning. While all the other soldiers were screaming and shouting, ready to face off against their enemies, he did not show any sign of emotion. This made her wonder if something was bothering him, she would have to ask him about that. It was then that she realized how long she had been staring at Saitama. She quickly turned her gaze forward. But then she noticed two men walk towards them. She did not like it. Coming to a halt, she placed her hand on Saitama's shoulder. "Hold up," she said, staring at him. "Those two could be trouble." Saitama turned his head towards the two men and watched as they now stood in front of him. He took two quick glances between the two of them. One of them had a thick beard and was wearing a fisherman's hat, while the other had short spiky hair. They were around Saitama's height. "Hey," one of the men said, staring at Saitama. "Are you him? The guy who defeated dozens of titans by just punching them?" he asked. Saitama nodded. "I knew it," the man exclaimed, grabbing hold of Saitama's shoulders and embracing him in a hug. "It might not concern you, but my son died about 2 months ago on the 55th expedition. He was killed by a titan. All they found was his upper body. I just want to thank you for avenging my son's death by slaughtering more of them," he said, tightening the embrace as his eyes began to water up. "You have no idea how much this means to me. Thank you, humanities blade. Thank you." Saitama replied, awkwardly patting the man's back. "You're welcome. And I'm sorry about your son." "Don't be," the man said, letting go of Saitama and rubbing his eyes. "From what I've heard, you arrived here when trust was breached, right?" "Well, my son died 2 months before that," the man solemnly said, staring at the ground. "Had you arrived a bit earlier, then yes, you might have been able to save him. But you arrived when you did, and I'm grateful for that. You gave us hope, sir." "Yeah," the other man added. "It's an honor being able to meet you in person. I've heard the stories, but I never thought they'd be true," he said, taking a quick glance at Petra. "And it seems the ladies are already lining up in line to get to know you better, huh?" he joked. Petra blushed. "Anyway," the man continued, "we'll be on our way. Thank you for everything, sir," he said, bowing his head to Saitama. "And thank you, ma'am, for risking your life for us," he said, bowing his head to Petra, who could not help but salute to the man. The two men bid their farewells and continued down the path they were walking. Saitama looked at Petra and spoke up. "So, when are we going to visit your mom and dad? Not that I'm impatient, but I'm kind of hungry," he said while trying to get something out of his teeth. "Unless you don't want to visit them yet. I mean, I know how people usually act when they introduce new people to their parents. They always get sweaty, start stuttering and dot." "No, I don't mind at all." Petra cut him off, hoping he would not somehow mention her little accident from yesterday's expedition. It was then that a question that had been on her mind for quite some time, now popped up in her head. "How does it feel?" she asked, getting Saitama to turn his head to her. "How does what feel? The weather?" Saitama replied, confused at her sudden question. "No, I meant how does it feel to punch titans? I mean, it seems like you put little to no effort into it, so I was kind of wondering how it feels for you to do such a thing. Just curious, really," Petra replied. "Well, I don't know. For me it feels normal, really. I mean, how would it feel for you to punch a titan?" Saitama replied. "If I ever had the guts to get close enough, I think I'd break my hand," Petra replied, laughing nervously. "So, does it feel like nothing, then?" she asked. "Well, it just feels normal, I guess. Like punching a person," Saitama replied. "Oh, okay," Petra said, looking to her side, slightly embarrassed. "I feel like you've become popular around here, Saitama," she said, taking quick glances at several townsfolk who were staring and whispering about Saitama and probably her. "Which is completely understandable. I know I've said this dozens of times, but you really are a hero. Not only because of your immense power, but also your caring nature, even though you barely show any emotion." "Mind if I ask why that is?" she asked. "That's a long story," Saitama replied. "And I hate long stories," he continued, scratching the back of his head in thought. "Is this the part where I say something nice about your outfit?" Petra looked at him, confusion written on her face. "My outfit? Why would you want to do that?" Sure, she was wearing casual clothes instead of her uniform, but was it that weird? Isn't that what people usually do when they go on these kinds of things? I mean, a girl asks a guy out and they say some nice things about one another. That's how it goes in the movies, anyway. Petra looked at him with a puzzled expression, but the pieces quickly added together and she blushed a deep shade of red before slowly turning her head away from Saitama. "You think this is a date?" she asked, though it sounded like a whisper. "Not that I'd mind, but I mean, this isn't a date or anything." "You talk a lot, you know that," Saitama interrupted her, staring at her with a deadpan look planted on his face. "Try to shorten it a bit." I have a very low concentration span and I really don't like listening to long stories. He moved his face closer to hers until he was looking her dead in her eyes. So, not a date? He asked. Petra bit her lip before speaking up. And no, I don't think so. Thank God, Saitama breathed out as he brought his finger to his nose. That booger had been stuck in there for way too long. He said, turning to her while shooting the green, slimy substance off his gloved finger. Didn't want to come off as uncivilized. You just did, though. Petra shuddered before clearing her throat. Well, it looks like we have arrived. She said, standing in front of a decent-looking house. Mother, father, I'm home. I brought a friend. Pain. Excruciating pain. That was the only thing she was feeling at the moment. When Annie Leonhardt was captured by the Survey Corps and brought into an underground detention center, she never would have thought this was the kinds of things they would be doing to her. A small wooden table stood in front of her, littered with various scalpels, spikes, and other methods of torture. And her torturer? None other than Captain Levi himself. She looked up at the young captain, teeth gritted and eyes glaring daggers at him. If she would ever get out of this mess, he would be the first one she'd kill along with Saitama. That bastard. That bold bastard. If it hadn't been for him, she would have decimated the Levi squad along with their captain. But now, thanks to his actions, she was stuck in this prison. She had been tortured and beaten. They tried breaking her, but she would not break. She was chosen for this. She would not give up. Her two comrades would surely come and save her. She was sure of it. You know, if you just spilled the beans this could all be over. I'll slice your neck and you'll be free from any further torture. Annie stared at the captain with a newfound hatred. She laughed at him mockingly, making the captain's glare towards her even more intimidating. Do you honestly think I believe a word you say? She asked the captain. I mean seriously, are you that dense? If you want me to talk, you'll have to try a lot harder than that. Sure, seemed Saitama didn't have to try hard, now did he? Levi asked, moving his face closer to hers. How did it feel? How did it feel, knowing you had lost the very moment you picked a fight with the guy? Were you angry? Scared? Because I would be angry, you know. I mean, picking a fight with someone who far surpasses your own strength is a very, very stupid thing to do. But of course, you are just a little brat. So, stupidity comes with age, I guess. I would have killed him. Annie started. But you couldn't. Because you were too weak. You still are. Levi retorted, his gaze never shifting. Tell that to those dozens of soldiers that now lay buried beneath the earth. Annie replied sarcastically. The answer from Levi was not met with words, but a scalpel puncturing her skin and digging into her leg. She winced and had to keep herself from screaming in pain when Levi slowly moved the scalpel further down her leg, cutting open the flesh that had just recently healed. Blood oozed out of her wound, staining the floor. Levi kept a monotone gaze on her leg, as if not disgusted in the slightest, even though blood stained his hands too. He pulled out the scalpel and moved to the other leg, ready to repeat the process as he had been doing for the last couple of hours. Annie wasn't sure how much more she could take of this. Levi's torture methods were extreme, designed to get a human being to talk within minutes. The fact that she held out this long was an accomplishment on its own. Annie tensed her muscles, ready to feel the agonizing pain once more, when suddenly the door to the room flung open, revealing none other than Commander Erwin himself. This made Levi stop, but the scalpel never left the palm of his hand. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Levi asked, turning around to face Erwin. I was in the middle of something, you know. Erwin shifted his gaze to Annie. Shaking his head, he turned his attention back to Levi. You've been here long enough, it's time for you to get some much-deserved rest. Hanji will take over. She has some new methods she wants to try out. He replied. As if on cue, Hanji came walking in with two other Survey Corps soldiers. She placed her hands on her hips, shaking her head. Such a shame the great Captain Levi wasn't able to get any info out of her. She said, looking at Levi with a small grin planted on her face. I mean, how hard can it be? She's just a spoiled little brat after all, right? Well, Levi began, moving closer to her. This so-called little brat is tougher than she looks. I cut open her legs for literal hours, then decided to go for some other body parts I'd rather not discuss, and then was about to go back to her legs again when you came bursting in. Never thought you'd want to touch female body parts that intimately. Hanji chuckled, walking past Levi. I have some other methods I'd like to try out. I want to see how her body will react to certain fluid being injected into her blood system. Titans seem to be immune to poison, or at least an amount that could put down 20 humans. So, I want to see how she reacts. Erwin held up his hand, motioning for her to stop. Let's just save the poison for another time. Right now, we must get her to talk. You're to use mechanical methods only. No need for biological experiments that could possibly kill her. We still need to learn who she's working for. You're no fun. Hanji whined in a childlike manner, making the two officers look at her with raised eyebrows. Levi shook his head before walking out of the room, but not before he whispered something into Erwin's ear. Erwin's ears perked up at what Levi told him, and he nodded to the captain and watched him take his leave. Hanji, Erwin said, getting her attention. Do what must be done to get her to talk. Saitama was feeling uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. The moment he stepped into the RAL house he was greeted by two overenthusiastic parents who were eagerly awaiting the arrival of humanity's blade. Saitama only greeted them back, not knowing how to talk to two parents who constantly kept asking question after question. In all honesty it was starting to annoy him, but he decided not to express his annoyance. Petra seemed to be having fun time. She was enjoying herself, telling stories of her adventures outside of the walls. Saitama looked down at his half-empty plate. The food was actually not that bad, and the soup Petra's mother had prepared really topped it all. The last time he had eaten this good was when Genos prepared udon. Genos? Saitama let out a sigh, thinking back to his disciple. He was starting to miss the young cyborg's presence. It wasn't like Petra or Levi weren't good company, but Genos had been with him for quite some time now, and he was starting to view the cyborg as a friend. If Genos were here, he would have surely come up with a plan to take out every single titan within the vicinity. He'd probably burn the whole forest of giant trees to the ground to do it. Perhaps Genos had anger issues. So, Saitama, how do you feel when facing off against a titan? Petra's father asked, looking at Saitama with curious intent. A lot of the times I've heard stories of soldiers freezing in place as titans surround them from every corner. Has this ever happened to you, Saitama? Nope. Saitama replied casually. Ah, I see. Mr. Ral said, clearing his throat. So, you truly are something or rather someone of great worth to humanity. Saitama shrugged, taking a bite from a piece of bread that was present on his plate. People keep telling me that, yes. That is simply amazing, Ms. Ral exclaimed, moving towards Saitama. You truly are an amazing man, Mr. Saitama. I can finally rest easy now, knowing we have you on our side. She said, turning to her husband. Don't you feel the same way, honey? Mr. Ral nodded his head, smiling as he took a quick glance at Saitama. I sure do. I mean, I haven't seen it in person, but with so many people telling stories about your strength, I can safely say that Captain Levi has to watch out or else he'll lose his title. Petra's ears perked up at that. Captain Levi. Petra, dear, isn't that the man you spoke so highly of just a few days ago? The one you sent a letter about? Yes, mother. Petra replied, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. But don't you think it's a bit too early for you to consider marriage? Mr. Ral asked, raising an eyebrow as he turned to Saitama. Don't you agree, Saitama? I think I'll skip answering that question, since where I come from asking a woman how old she is considered rude. Saitama replied. Unless things here are different. Not really interested in other people's affairs. But surely you must agree that when you're young you should enjoy life at its fullest. Mr. Ral reasoned, only to be cut off by a less pleased Petra Ral. Father, I am not a child anymore. I do not need your help in these kinds of matters. I'm out there risking my life for humanity while you stay here behind these walls. So is Captain Levi. And so is Saitama. It is my life and I can do whatever I want with it. And you are my daughter. Just how old is that Captain Levi? Surely he is at least 5 years older than you. Mr. Rao reasoned. Who knows? That's for you to find out, Petra snapped back. Could I have some more bread, please? This is the first time I've had bread that isn't stale ever since I got here. Saitama cut in, holding up his plate. Take the whole loaf for all I care, Petra snapped at him. You mean it? Saitama asked, reaching for said loaf. I'm going to get some fresh air. Alone. Petra said. The 3 remaining people in the house of Rel could only watch as Petra exited the comfort of her house. An awkward silence befell the household, with Mr. and Ms. Rel exchanging glances of worry towards one another. They both turned to Saitama, as if he had something to say in the matter. But their hopes quickly withered when they saw Saitama stare at them with that monotone gaze of his. Mr. Rao let out a long sigh before burying his head in his hands. I just don't want to see my daughter make rash decisions. He shamefully admitted, looking up at Saitama. Surely you can understand this from my point of view, can you? He asked. I don't think so. I don't have a daughter. Saitama replied. Perhaps she's just a little worn out. This is the first time she ever brought someone home with her after an expedition. Normally she would come alone, tired and would not say a word. She'd usually go up to her room and lay in her bed. I don't know what suddenly changed her mind, but I think it has something to do with Captain Levi. Mr. Ral said. Shorty? Why is that? Saitama asked, raising an eyebrow. She wrote in a letter that she wanted to devote her whole life to him. That sounds kinky, I guess. Saitama cut in. She wrote that the captain had done something to steal her heart away from her. I don't know what has gotten into her, but I hope she doesn't make the wrong decision. She's just a young girl. She has so many years before devoting her life to some man thanks to you," Mr. Rowell said, smiling. "I think everyone has. I know you have probably heard this dozens of times, but thanks to you humanity has gotten his hopes up once more. First there was that Titan boy, and now there is you. Of course, Captain Levi is strong as well but still. I just don't see my daughter and him in the way she does. I know this is not my decision to make, but still she will always be my little Petra, who I once held as a baby." Saitama only listened to Mr. Rowell as he kept on talking about Petra in her early days as a child. In truth he could see why Mr. Rowell was so concerned. But even so, Captain Levi seemed like a pretty reasonable guy. Short but reasonable, and his habit for wearing cleaning dresses could be considered a little weird too. And there is the fact that he sometimes spends a lot of time on his hair, plus the fact he sometimes scolds himself for getting dirty. Wait, what was he thinking about again? Oh, yes, Petra. Yeah, she was a pretty cool girl. She enjoyed the little things and always seemed to be interested in sharing conversations with Saitama. When they were in the barracks, on the field, even though she vomited on him and yesterday at the small lake. Saitama thought back at that moment, but his thoughts drifted off to the fishes that resided in that lake. He really wanted to go and see them again. He could swear there was salmon in there too. Perhaps even other cool fishes. Petra was angry anyways, so it wouldn't be considered rude if he just took his leave for a while, right? "So, what do you think?" Mr. Rowell suddenly asked, shaking Saitama out of his thoughts. Saitama looked at Mr. Rowell and opened his mouth to speak up. "I must take my leave," he said, turning around and walking to the door. "And why is that?" Mr. Rowell asked curiously. "There are fishes waiting for me," Saitama said in a serious tone. "And I must not wait any longer. Goodbye, and thank you for the meal." The Rowells both looked at Saitama in utter confusion as he left the household. Deciding not to press on, they decided to clean up. Saitama exited the house, determined to find out what kinds of fish resided in the small lake. It came as a bit of a surprise, however, when he saw Petra talking to Captain Levi and squad leader Mike. He decided to just walk past them, hoping they would ignore him. "Hey, Baldy." Suddenly came the voice of Captain Levi. "I need to have a word with you." "I do not see what my baldness has to do with trying to get my attention," Saitama replied, turning to face Levi. "How can I help you, midget?" he asked, hoping the insult would strike a nerve in Levi as it did with him when he called him Baldy. He really did not like being called that. He stretched his arms, yawning while doing so. "So, what do you want to talk about? How good are you at getting people talking?" Chapter 13. Saitama was confused. He was not sure about Levi's question. Getting people to talk. What was that supposed to mean? Who needed to talk? Was it Irin? Or Mikasa? He did not know, but he didn't care either. His lunch with Petra was pretty neat, and the food wasn't all that bad either. The talk with her parents was a little weird. He didn't know much about girls, nor marriage or anything along the lines of that. "Hey, Baldy, you listening?" Came the voice of Levi, shaking Saitama out of his thoughts. "When we arrive at the prison, you'll have to do some things you'd rather not to." Levi continued, not averting his eyes off Saitama. "But we need Annie to talk. We need to know who she's working for." "Okay, but why did you not just ask her to talk?" Saitama replied, raising an eyebrow. "I mean, what have you guys been doing ever since we came back from the expedition? Not that I've been doing anything productive other than filling my belly with food." He finished with a yawn at the end. "Whoa, looks like my body is telling me to take a nap." "Then your body is wrong," Levi retorted. "No naps. Would anyone care to remind me how this guy became humanity's savior?" Saitama deadpanned. Instead of getting a verbal reply, he instead felt a hot breath on his bald head. Raising an eyebrow in confusion, Saitama turned his head and was met with the face of squad leader Mike, who was sniffing him. He was sniffing him. Why was he sniffing him? Mind telling what you're doing?" Saitama asked, raising an eyebrow at the tall leader. "I know I don't smell that good, but don't you think this is a bit overkill?" he continued. Mike shrugged before taking his attention away from Saitama. He then kept his face forward, not paying attention to anyone but the road in front of him. Saitama did not say anything. Instead, he listened to what Levi was telling him, which was a rarity. "Listen, Baldy, we have to find out why Annie did what she did. She killed troops I watched grow into soldiers. She killed them in cold blood. She betrayed all of us. Do you understand what I'm getting at?" Levi said, closing the space between him and Saitama. "I've tried everything I could, well, at least what Erwin wanted me to do. Now it's up to you. Use whatever methods you see fit. Just get her to spill the beans." This time it was Petra who replied. "I don't think that Saitama is a guy to do those kinds of things," she whispered into Levi's ear. "I mean, he seems like a pretty relaxed guy whenever he's facing off against titans. But having him torture someone? I don't think he'd like that. She added, taking a quick glance at Saitama before returning her attention to Levi again. Why don't you just try again? I have already tried too much, Levi whispered back. I mean I would have nearly killed her had Erwin not come in. I was losing my bucking patience, Petra. You were losing your patience. Who are you and what have you done to Captain Levi? Petra whispered back in a joking manner, although Levi's serious expression quickly dismissed that hint of humor. Apologies, Captain, I just forgot about the situation. I'm sorry. No need for apologies, Petra. Levi replied, shaking his head as he quickened his pace, not wanting to waste any time. I feel that these last couple of days have been tiresome for all of us. Even Erwin is getting a little sick and tired from all this vague information. The goal is Iran's basement and whatever we'll find in there that might help us end the Titan threat. He took a quick glance at Saitama. And that guy will be the one leading us into victory. You think so? Petra asked, raising an eyebrow at her captain. I'm surprised you're all taking this so well, Captain. I mean everyone always thought so highly of you before Saitama arrived. They all thought you would be the one to lead us into victory, and I did too. She admitted solemnly. You did? Levi asked. Yes, but after I've seen what Saitama can do, I'm not sure who's going to lead us into victory. Petra replied. Does it even matter? Both Levi and Petra turned to Mike, who had suddenly decided to chime in on their conversation. They both looked at Mike with a hint of curiosity planted on their faces. What do you mean, Mike? Petra asked. As long as we're being led into victory, I couldn't care less. I will always follow Captain Levi, he said, turning to Levi to emphasize on his comment. But I will also follow Saitama. He has proven himself to me. Instead of thinking about who is better, why not think about what kind of team they could make? He suggested. And why not shorten your conversation? Saitama called out to them in a sarcastic manner. I'm just going to continue walking, if you don't mind. Boy, the sun sure looks pretty today. The three soldiers all shook their heads before following the Cape Baldy. He's strong. Stronger than any of us. Levi commented to himself, eyeing Saitama curiously. It's not common I show so much appreciation. And even though he acts like he doesn't care, he's still a member of my squad, albeit an honorary member. But I do not regret my decision. With the right amount of training, he can become an expert with the 3DMG, and along with his power we can finally free humanity from its tormentors. Levi continued to stare at Saitama. Considering the fact he defeated Annie in her Titan form is an accomplishment on its own. This man he will become the new humanity's strongest soldier. Levi softly chuckled to himself. And it looks like defending my title is a lost cause as well. Ah well, not that I care anyways. I mean a title is just a title after all. Petra too had her own thoughts on Saitama but decided not to pay too much attention to them. They had other issues that needed to be attended to. Starting with Annie. That girl needed to pay one way or another. Annie stared at squad leader Hanji with newfound anger and hatred. She had done some pretty gruesome things to her. Levi's torture was bad, but hers was even worse. Cutting off fingernails and pulling them out was something that nearly made her burst out into tears. Then came the cutting. She cut her entire body up to the point where she would have almost bled out. But this woman was smart and knew enough about human anatomy that prevented her from dealing a killing blow to her body. And after the cutting came the cauterizations. Her skin was as black as charcoal, and were it not for her Titan healing, she would have died on the spot. But she was strong. She was chosen to be a Titan shifter. She was stronger than anyone else. You're not, by the way. Hanji mused humorously. And before you ask. Yes, you did say that out loud. She gave a soft chuckle, staring intensely at the Titan shifter seconds later. I mean, how could you even think you'd get close to matching Saitama's strength? The man is a walking god. He can defeat every single Titan in this world. You are nothing compared to him. And even so, should Saitama fail, which I highly doubt he would, Captain Levi would be happy to take his place. He'd cut you up into tiny pieces. You'd be dead before you know it. Annie said nothing. This psychological bullying and torture were not going to get to her. And I heard he's coming here, you know. Hanji added. What? Annie exclaimed in shock, not expecting Hanji to tell her this information. Got you? Hanji laughed. And it looks like I just found out the thing you fear the most. That being Saitama. She shook her head, calming herself down. But no, Saitama isn't coming. I mean, if he did, you'd probably shit your pants. Once I get out of here, Annie sneered, glaring at Hanji intensely. I'm killing you first. Threats from a caged bird. A bird who will never have the ability to spread her wings ever again. Hanji retorted, spinning a scalpel between her fingers. Now let's try this again, shall we? She asked, stabbing the scalpel into Annie's collarbone. Who are you working for? What is he or she trying to accomplish? She asked, slowly twisting the scalpel, breaking off small piece of bone in the process. Why did you betray your fellow humans? Annie said nothing as she simply stared at Hanji. The scalpel was pulled out and brought back into her bone. Tell me what I want to know and I'll make the pain stop. Hanji said slowly, hoping this would get Annie to finally break out of her shell. If not, then I'll begin stabbing into some more private areas. She said, motioning to Annie's lower area. Go ahead, Annie smirked. Levi already did that. Ooh, I like where this is going. Hanji smirked, taking out the scalpel. Well, if you're sure about then I don't see why I can't. Squad leader Hanji. Hanji turned her head only to be met by one of the guards that were guarding the entrance to Annie's cell. Yes? She asked, curiosity present in her voice. How can I help you? I'm clearly busy. Your shift ends now. One of the guards stated, coming through the door to let two persons enter. He will be taking over from here on out. You're dismissed, squad leader. What? Hanji exclaimed in anger, balling her hands up into fist. I'll kick his ass for this. Who is it? Let me through that door so I can punch that son of a bitch, she continued, running past the guard and bringing her arm back for a full-blown punch to whoever was interrupting her in her experiments. She felt her fist collide with flesh. She smirked. That would teach him. Just, why? Came the monotone voice of someone Hanji knew all too well. SS Saitama. Hanji stuttered, backing up. I was just testing to see how good your reflexes were. Shame on you, by the way, not seeing my punch coming. She nervously scolded him, hoping he'd forget about this whole thing faster than she could run away from him, should he not. So, what brings you here? Him, Saitama replied, pointing a backwards thumb to Captain Levi, who stood inside the doorframe tapping his foot impatiently on the wooden floor, sending the echoes of said tapping through Hanji's ears. Everyone could feel the tension rising. Levi was not happy with Hanji's actions. But I was sent here to talk to her. Saitama added, looking at Annie while walking past Hanji. Hi Annie. He greeted her. Get away from me, Annie demanded, stomping her foot down on the floor. Get away from me, you freak. Okay. Saitama replied, turning around and taking his exit, only to be stopped by Levi. What? He asked, raising an eyebrow at the captain. She said no. And in girl standards, no means yes. Levi retorted, spinning Saitama around to get him to face Annie again. Go get her or something along the lines of that. I swear the new recruits have a way with their words. They sure do. Hanji replied, cautiously walking past Saitama. And by the way, no still means no. Unless you want a foot shoved up your . Not a word, Hanji. Levi cut her off, turning to Saitama one last time. You can kick her ass later, by the way. Just get that brat to talk. Saitama watched as they took their leave, along with the guards that were with them. He sighed, not really wanting to talk to anyone. He turned to Annie and saw a broken girl. She was exhausted, like she had been running all day with no pauses. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Her arms, legs, and back were all chained to this uncomfortable-looking wooden chair. Her clothes were torn, and there were drops of blood everywhere. What had they been doing to her? Hey, are you feeling okay? Saitama asked, taking a wooden chair and taking a seat opposite of Annie. You really don't look so good. Have you even eaten anything? Annie said nothing, even going as far as to avert her gaze from him. This guy again. Great. Like her day wasn't bad from the get-go. Here. Annie looked up to see Saitama holding what appeared to be a brown rectangular-shaped bar. She stared at the strange item he was holding. Crunchy chocolate at red. What the heck was that supposed to mean? She knew what chocolate was. It was one of the most expensive and exquisite treats within the walls. And only those living in Walsina had ever gotten the opportunity to taste it. She stared at the item again and then dared to take a quick glance at Saitama. His gaze was unlike that of Levi or Hanji. It was neutral. Even calming, in a way. She quickly forced herself to look away from the bar, however, knowing exactly what he was getting at. Trying to buy me over isn't going to work. Why not try the scalpels? I mean everyone else tried, so why don't you? She asked sarcastically. Oh. Saitama said, picking up a blood-stained scalpel from a nearby wooden table. I'm not a fan of knives. He said, crushing the scalpel in his palm until it was nothing more than a small iron ball. He twirled it between his gloved fingers before dropping it to the floor. I'm not here to hurt you, you know. If I'd known this is what they were doing to you, I'd have stopped them. I will after we finish talking. Talk about what? Annie asked. Still figuring that one out. They didn't really give me very clear instructions. Annie deadpanned. So, this guy didn't even know why he was here. Or was this another one of his weird mind tricks or something? When she was in her Titan form and he asked her oh so innocently to come out of it, she almost complied almost. This had to be another one of his tricks. Aren't you hungry? Saitama asked. Even if I was hungry, how the hell will I be able to eat a damn thing? Annie retorted. I can't eat, I'm chained to this chair. Can't you see that? As a reply, Saitama brought the bar closer to her face, making her look at him in confusion. She didn't know what he was trying to do, but she didn't like it one bit. It was when the bar touched her lips did realize why chocolate was so damn hard to find. She quickly opened her mouth and took a huge chunk out of the bar. She chewed and almost sighed in delight at the taste. This tasted amazing. She took another bite and another one until she suddenly munched down on Saitama's fingers. She widened her eyes and quickly retracted her head. I'm sorry, Annie blurted out, a shade of red forming on her cheeks. Wait, did she just say she was sorry? Why did she say that? That's okay, Saitama said, staring at the tiny bite marks on his red glove. Things like that happen when you're hungry. I almost bit off my mom's fingers when she was feeding me as a baby. So, no hard feelings. He added. Annie stared at Saitama again with newfound curiosity. She had just been fed by the same man who defeated her with little effort just one day ago. First, he just walked into her cell like it was a normal visit, then he crushed a freaking scalpel with his bare hand, and then he gave her one of the most expensive treats out there like it was normal bread. What the hell was wrong with this guy? Was he really that desperate to get information out of her? Or was he actually being nice with her? Well, did you like it? Saitama asked. Annie slowly nodded her head. She decided, knowing she'd never get out of this mess, she might as well ask Saitama the question that had been roaming through her mind for the last couple of hours. How did you become as strong as you are now, Saitama? Annie asked with genuine curiosity in her voice. Saitama pinched the bridge of his nose before speaking up. Well, you're not the first one to ask me this. But promise me you won't lash out, okay? He asked, looking at her with a serious expression. I hate it when people do that. Annie slowly nodded her head. Let me tell you a little something about a hero I once read in a book. A book my mother used to read to me. Saitama said, getting her full attention. There was once a boy named Toto. Toto was a totally normal boy and was paddling in the sea one day when a sea urchin stung him. At that precise moment, when he was rubbing his foot, he was simultaneously attacked by an octopus, a mosquito and a parrotfish. While being whipped by the tail of a platypus and having a seagull poop on his head, from such an unlikely confluence of events, there could only emerge a new superhero with impressive superpowers. Superpower Ultraman. Such were his powers that he immediately thought he should not waste them on little things, and Superpower Ultraman began hunting danger and threats to the world so he could save us from the worst of the worst. Saitama caught his breath for a second. He was not used to this kind of storytelling. He looked at Annie, who was simply staring at him, her face filled with curiosity. So, he decided to continue. But the more he searched with his super sight, the more he traveled the world with his hypervelocity and listened to the skies with his multi-frequency digital hearing, he found no one trying to conquer the galaxy or attempting to blow up the planet. He couldn't even find some villain planning to drain the seas or plunder a mountain. It seemed as though everyone, the good and the bad, were busy with much more mundane things and they only had normal problems. So, Superpower Ultraman spent his days bored, exploring the skies in search of missions impossible that were deserving of a superhero of his caliber. He got so very bored that when they offered him a television program to demonstrate his abilities, he accepted, though he would only get the chance to rescue a few dozen people. And when, finally, his moment of glory arrived, about which every superhero dream, his demonstration turned into a complete disaster. Superpower Ultraman was so used to thinking of things on a grand scale that he didn't know how to grab and rescue a single person. He did everything to the max, without controlling his strength or his speed, so the whole thing ended up as a painful mix of blows, bruises, scratches, shouts, broken bones and torn clothing. Hurt and half naked, the saved ended up calling the superhero everything under the sun, amid the loud laughter of the public and journalists. It's possible that no superhero had ever been so embarrassed. And ever since that day, any time someone refuses to do something because they consider it to be beneath themselves, everyone remembers the case of Superpower Ultraman and says, "Don't be such a Superpower Ultraman, if you never learn how to do the little things, you'll never know greatness." After he had finished the story, a story written by the talented Pedro Pablo Sacristan, he looked at Annie again. Her face was filled with a mix of confusion and awe. Saitama was surprised a bedtime story meant for little children could engulf someone so quickly. He decided to let Annie talk first, hoping this would get her to open up a bit. "What does this have to do with you?" Annie asked. "Well, like Superpower Ultraman, I expected too much. Having overwhelming power is pretty boring. And I realized that a long time ago. I trained so hard that I simply defeated all of my enemies with one punch. And in all honesty, I don't feel any kind of emotion while battling. No fear, joy, anger, nothing. Just nothing," Saitama replied. "Then you felt no fear when we were fighting?" Annie asked. "Nope," Saitama replied. "Not at all. Then how did you become so strong? You still didn't answer my question. Annie remarked. I want to know. Saitama took a deep breath before speaking up to tell her the truth. All I did was 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats and a 10-kilometer run every day for 3 years. Then I got this strong. Annie's jaw almost hit the ground when she heard him say that. This guy had to be messing with her. He had to no way he could have become this strong by just doing that. In her fit of rage, Annie began to hyperventilate. Her face turned red and she felt like she was about to explode. Saitama, seeing this as a life-threatening situation, broke the chains around her chair. Breathe, Annie, breathe. He said, patting her back. I need fresh air, please. Annie wheezed. Okay. Saitama replied. He picked her up and threw her over his shoulder and ran out of the prison cell, leaving a trail of dust and 2 very confused prison guards behind him. Within seconds the duo reached the outside world. Saitama placed Annie down, patting her back reassuringly. Okay, now take some deep breaths, and dot. Saitama was cut off when Annie brought her finger to her mouth and chomped down on it. In a blinding fit of anger, Annie stared at Saitama. Mission accomplished. He had played right into her hands. His sympathies with her would be his downfall. A bright flash of lightning struck Annie, and within seconds she transformed into her Titan form. She looked down at Saitama and raised her foot. Annie, what do you think you're doing? Saitama asked. Instead of a verbal reply, Annie's foot slammed down upon him. Chapter 14. Loud cracks, ear-deafening screams of pure terror, and destroyed buildings were all that could be heard throughout the inner wall. Titans were a threat no one wanted to encounter. Especially those within the inner walls. Those walls were meant to be a safe haven for people with enough power, wealth and status. So, imagine their surprise when a Titan, a female one at that, was running rampant through the city after having repeatedly been stomping on the same spot for at least a dozen times before somewhat being satisfied with the result. The result being that Titan's greatest annoyance several feet below the ground with no possible means of escape whatsoever. Annie Leonhardt was satisfied. With her somewhat easy escape from the Survey Corporation's clutches, thanks to a dull-headed Saitama, she was now free to resume her mission. However, her mission was somewhat difficult to complete because she had absolutely no idea where to start looking for Eren Yeager. The Survey Corps was supposed to have some kind of a meeting within these walls. She overheard that much before her capture. Supposedly Erwin was going to discuss the Survey Corporation's influence within the walls. Presumably he wanted to get more recruits and wanted to spread the message within all walls, including this one. And as an example of how strong the Survey Corps is, he probably wanted Eren to accompany him along the way. A foolish mistake on his end. Annie, now in her Titan form, was running rampant through the streets. She didn't care much for civilians, and the military police were all too dazzled to even begin to comprehend what was even happening. But who could blame them? A Titan within the innermost wall. You would be thrown into prison for even suggesting such an idea. Annie looked to her right, watching in slight amusement when several MP officers cowered in fear when they stared directly into her eyes. Inwardly she chuckled, but on the outside her Titan features stayed the same. Monotone, fearless, that is who she was. Saitama was indeed powerful, almost as powerful as basically any Titan she had encountered. Even Reiner and Bertolt would have trouble taking care of him. But now that he was buried underneath a thick layer of concrete and dirt. Only a mere 400 meters away from Annie's position, a small group of military police grunts were watching the Titan they had heard about so much close in on their position. Many of the troops, even the elder and higher-ranking ones, had fled to higher ground, hoping the female Titan would not get them. The fact that only a handful of recruits stood firm, whether that be by adrenaline or misguided courage, proved once more how inferior the MP was compared to the Survey Corps. No matter how many MPs would be facing off against Titans, the Survey Corps would tenfold that kill count. Holy shit. One of the grunts breathed out in disbelief, running a sweaty hand over his face. I can't believe what I'm seeing. How did it get inside? This is the innermost wall, for crying out loud. He tuned to his comrades, hoping they would agree with him or perhaps try to shut him up. He just wanted someone to say something, damn it. Looks like we're all doomed, then. Another grunt, this one presumably the oldest of the group, replied, shaking his head and chuckling grimly to himself. Fritz, you sure you don't want to run and hide from your problems like always? He asked Fritz, who was glaring daggers at the female Titan as she kept closing on their position. Shut up, Wilhelm. Fritz replied, his eyes still fixed upon the Titan. This is the last time you mock me, asshole. He turned to his comrades, letting out a sigh before speaking up. What have we been doing these last couple of months? Chasing criminals, patrolling the city, and doing some other crap that won't help humanity prevail. We should be fighting right now, not running. You chose this life, asshole. Wilhelm replied, crossing his arms. If you wanted to fight so badly, then you should have chosen the Survey Corps. You could be hanging out with that guy who kills titans with just one punch. He snickered. And where is that guy now? Probably doing some stupid shit that isn't helping anyone. Your bucking behavior isn't helping anyone either, you idiot, Fritz retorted, clenching his fist. For so many years I've heard stories about the Survey Corps. About their commander. I always thought to myself, why do they do it? You know, why do they go out and fight for a cause they cannot possibly win? But then I realized something. It's because they wanted to be free, they wanted to live their lives as they see fit. They got to see some of the outside world and they even took back some parts from Walmaria, I believe. Fritz turned to his comrades, his friends, and in a way, his family. I know you're all scared shitless. Heck, even I'm not even sure what the hell I'm doing right now. But I do know one thing, we should never let fear control us. We should never let the Titans control us. That is why I trained to become a member for the Survey Corps. And yet you joined the MP. Wilhelm stated, glaring at him. Shut the hell up with your stupid speeches and just face it, we have to run and hide. Yeah, Fritz breathed out, looking down at his feet. When I graduated in the top 10 candidates last year, I thought the Survey Corps would be the right choice. All of my friends wanted to join the Wall guys and others the MP, the ones in the top 10, at least. Thing is, I actually met Commander Irwin. I met the man I wanted to serve under and was scared. He told me how many men he had lost a week before graduation. His monotone speech pattern, his emotionless face as he told me about a man being ripped in half by a titan. This man was no man, he was a monster, hiding in human flesh. He looked up at the sky, holding back tears of regret as he gritted his teeth. But now I realize that in order to defeat monsters, we have to become monsters ourselves. In order to defeat we must sacrifice and we just have to go for it, knowing full well what is going to happen next. If I have to die fighting against monsters, then I am happy to abandon my humanity. I will become monster myself in order to defeat a monster. What the hell do you think you're doing, you idiot? One of the MP grunts exclaimed in horror when Fritz successfully attached his 3D MGS cable to Annie's neck. You're going to get yourself killed. We're the MP, for crying out loud, Fritz, barely over 18 years old, retorted, his eyes fixed upon the female titan as he propelled himself upwards. If we kill the titan the Survey Corporation has been going after for such a long time, he started, taking out two blades and crossing them in front of his face. Then I can be happy, knowing I did something right. He used the momentum of his swing, combined with the zero gravity he was feeling at the time of his leap, to launch himself at the female titan. So just die, he screamed before closing in on the nape of the monster that had killed so many soldiers. The soldier, even with all of his bravery and courage, never got close to his target as his 3D MG cable was grabbed by the female titan and pulled on with strength that could match 100 men. The Solider could only watch in pure shock as he felt his BPD being slammed into the concrete roof of one of the nearby buildings of the inner wall city. After the initial impact, only a bloody mess of bones, flesh and blood were left of what was once a brave Solider of the MP. Fritz, no, Wilhelm screamed in anger as he shot his cable at the female titan. You're going to regret killing my friend, Wilhelm shouted, only to be met by a fist the size of a boulder that hit him square in the face, sending his head flying as his headless body fell to the concrete ground. Both soldiers had fallen, and Annie simply advanced. Annie looked around and watched as several MP soldiers glided away from the scene, not wanting to end up like the one she had just killed. Annie had to think and use her head. Was she going to go after Eren and complete her mission, or was she going to escape and prevent capture? She wondered what Bertolt and Reiner would have done. Unlike Reiner, she didn't have thick armor covering up most of her body, and her hardening abilities could only last that long. Bertolt would have no trouble taking care of the city, probably destroying it in the process too before capturing Eren. But she needed to be careful. She might have taken care of Saitama, but there was another threat she had to worry about. Captain Levi. He was a dangerous man who definitely lived up to his reputation. He was a well-respected, high-class soldier who knew how to handle things. She experienced this firsthand when she was fighting against Saitama. Even though her attention was mostly focused on the Baldy, Captain Levi still did a number on her as well. The number of times he cut through her skin without giving her the chance to harden her skin was almost inhuman. But so was Saitama's strength. She had to find Eren. She had to find him and she had to capture him. That was her mission, and she would complete it. And that is what we've managed to gather from her. Absolutely nothing. Levi finished, crossing his arms while leaning back into his chair. I couldn't get anything out of her, so I sent in Saitama to squeeze some information out of her. He finished, closing his eyes. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens next. Are you sure Saitama will be able to crack that shell of hers? Petra asked, resting her head on the palms of her hands. I mean, he knows how to beat titans. But can he get something out of one? I'm not too sure about that. Levi replied. But I nearly killed her on several occasions, actually. I knew I would have ended up killing her. whether by accident or intentional. That's why I sent him in. Besides, I'm sure Annie clearly remembers their previous encounter. Maybe it'll send some fear into her. Levi looked at the half-empty cup of black tea that stood in front of him, almost begging him to finish it. He shook his head and continued. But now that one of our threats is locked behind bars, all we have to do is find out if there are any others like her. We know there's Irin, and there's also the Armored Titan and Colossal Titan we have to worry about. If one of those two were to return, we'd be in for some trouble. But we have Saitama, Gunther piped in, cracking his knuckles. You saw what he did to those titans chasing after us. I say let those titans reappear, I'm sure they'll be dealt with accordingly. He smirked. Levi shot Gunther a glare before replying. We cannot rely on Saitama to take care of all of our problems. We've been fighting titans for as long as we can remember. Even though we have gained an ally that has proven to be useful time after time again, we cannot let our guard down. What if something happens while Saitama is unavailable? Do you think he'll be able to simply appear out of thin air and take care of all our problems? No. He's human strong, but still human. Last time I checked, humans were not as strong as titans. Gunther retorted. I get what you mean, Captain, but still Saitama can dot. Saitama, 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 Alu repeated in a high-pitched voice, holding his hands to his chest, as if he was flustered. Why is it always about Saitama? He exclaimed, slamming his fist on the table he and the rest of the Special Operations Squad were seated at. For too many days I've heard nothing but praise for this guy. Are we seriously forgetting the hardships we've gone through for so many years? I mean, soldiers died, for crying out loud. He looked at Petra, pointing an accusing finger at her. And I don't know what your deal is, but you have been spending an awful lot of time with him, that's for sure. So? Is that a problem? Petra retorted, crossing her arms. Once you get to know him, you discover there's more to him that meets the eye. More than meets the eye? Petra, can you even hear yourself talk? You're talking like he's one of us, for crying out loud. He doesn't even know our hand signals, nor do I expect him to, considering he has the attention span of a fly. Then both of you please take this conversation outside. Eld asked, clearly irritated at the constant arguing between two of his companions, which was interrupting his reading time. No, you know what, I'm going to want to hear Alu's lame excuse for his distaste of Saitama. Petra said, looking at Alu. So, go right ahead, Alu. You can tell me all of it and I'll listen. No interruptions, no retorts or remarks. I'll be quiet and you'll talk. Captain, are you just going to allow this to happen? Eld asked, looking up from the book he was reading. If it'll make them shut up. Levi shrugged. Eld sighed before continuing to read his book again. But secretly he was listening to the arguments Alu was about to say. Well, Alu started. He's always around when he shouldn't be. He literally got to meet Commander Irwin and so many other upper-class military officers in a time span of literal days. He interrupted a court and didn't even get punished for it. He dislocated Captain Levi's shoulder and didn't even get a slap back for it. Let's not forget about the fact that everyone seems to adore the guy, even though he clearly has no clue as to what's going on. And there's also the fact that, well, there are just so many other things going inside my head and I can't name all of them, okay? When I got home to my family I just didn't know what to tell them. Alu sighed, rubbing his temples while doing so. Is that it? Petra asked, raising an eyebrow. I've known you for quite some time now, Alu. There's something else to all of this, isn't there? Petra asked. I have no ulterior motives. Alu snorted, huffing while looking away from Petra. Alu? Petra said, moving closer to him. Are you sure? She inquired. Alu sighed and slowly turned his head to Petra, staring into her eyes. Just don't tell anyone, okay? He said, sighing inwardly when Petra nodded her head. When I arrived home, hours after we had our drinks and returned from the expedition, my mother and father were overjoyed when they saw me. We hugged and talked and I told them what had happened. Then my little brothers arrived and started asking questions too, which I was happy to answer. I liked talking about the expedition. My little brothers would always ask me how many titans I had slain today. But this time was different. Instead of asking me how it went, the first thing my little brother asked me was if I got to see the Caped Man in action. He closed his eyes before continuing. It was like they didn't even take into consideration the fact I could have died out there. All they asked was who the Caped Man was and how strong he was. Petra shook her head slightly, chuckling before playfully punching Alu in his shoulder. Alu, how are you jealous? She asked, chuckling even louder when Alu looked flustered and looked away. I'm not. Alu replied, crossing his arms. All I'm saying is I feel kind of disappointed. Alu, Petra began, placing a comforting hand on Alu's shoulder before continuing. There's no need to be disappointed. Look at it this way, your brothers didn't ask you how it went because you've been on so many expeditions. You've killed more titans than any of us. You're one of the most skilled fighters out there. You might not be Saitama, but you are Alu. You're part of the most elite squad in the regiment. Yeah, Alu said smugly. I am. Petra let out a sigh before turning to Captain Levi. Captain, please do me a favor and. Petra was cut off by a door opening. The Levi squad, curious as to who would be so blunt and straightforward to not even consider knocking before entering, turned their heads to the doorway, only to see Armin standing there, panting heavily as he stared at them with widened eyes. Armin, Eld said, standing up. What's going on? You look like you've just ran a marathon. He spoke. There's a situation that needs your full attention. The female titan is running rampant through the city, Armin replied, pointing a finger at the doorway. The MP is trying to fend it off well, the ones who aren't running for their lives are the rest of the survey corps is still within Trost. The only ones left within the walls are you, Commander Irwin, Squad Leader Mike, Squad Leader Hanji, Irin, Mikasa, and I. The room went silent for a good 10 seconds. It was like something had just hit all of them with a strength that could match that of Saitama. The silence lasted for what seemed like minutes until Levi spoke up. Gather the troops. Eld, Gunther, send a message to the rest of our men and tell them to get here as soon as possible. I know it'll take time, so I expect efficiency. Petra, Alu, you're with me. Levi said, getting off his chair. Gather your equipment and get ready to move out. Armin, go outside and alert the commander. Where are Irin and Mikasa? Outside this building. Irin's not too sure what happened either. Armin replied. Send me Irin. You take Mikasa with you. Do not let her or Irin engage the female titan unless I order them to. Last time Saitama was with me and we're going to need his help. Levi said, putting on his 3DMG. Sir, Armin gulped, shaking his head furiously. I do not know if it's true, but when I watched people flee from the scene, I overheard a few of them scream that the caped man was killed by the female titan. Stomped into the ground and wasn't seen again. He looked at Levi with a fearful expression, tears forming in his eyes. I can go and look for him if. No. Levi cut him off, holding his head. Our main focus is the female titan. Do as I order you to. All of you. No heroics. Stick together and we'll make it through this with minimal damage. Sir, yes sir, everyone replied, saluting their captain. As everyone started putting on their gear, Armin took this opportunity to run outside the building he was in and meet up with Irin and Mikasa. The female titan Annie was inside the wall. She was probably going to search for Irin and would not stop until she got to him. Luckily Irin could do a number on her with his titan form and the Levi squad was also here. Annie would have a hard time getting to Irin. But still the things those people shouted, could it all be true? Was Saitama really killed? It couldn't be true. Saitama had faced off against her before and defeated her with little to no effort, at least that's how the story went. So how could he be defeated by the same titan he defeated a day before? Shaking that thought out of his head, Armin reached his two friends and spoke up. Armin. Irin said, grabbing the young man by his shoulders. So, what's the plan? Captain Levi wants us to split up. He's coming up here in a second and has ordered Mikasa and I to go and find Commander Irwin and inform him of the situation. Irin, you are to stay here and wait for Captain Levi to come out. He'll inform you of the rest of the plan. I'm not leaving Irin behind. Mikasa said. But the captain ordered. I don't care, Mikasa cut Armin off. Mikasa, do as the captain orders you to do and go with him. Irin replied, looking at her with determined eyes. I'll be safe. I promise. I've got Captain Levi behind me. I'll be safe. Mikasa's reply was a quick hug to Irin, followed up by her shooting one of her 3DMG cables at a nearby building. I promised I'd keep you safe. I'll make this quick. Irin, stay out of danger until I get back. Armin, let's go. Right, Armin replied, shooting his own cables at the same building Mikasa had shot hers. Irin, be safe. Irin's eyes, filled with determination, nodded his head and watched as his two closest friends, ones whom he considered family, left to fulfill their duty. They would succeed, he was sure of it. But would he? He hadn't fought against the female titan and was unaware of its abilities. The one who defeated her was Saitama and he is supposedly killed. Irin gritted his teeth in anger. He had so much to ask that man. So much things the two of them could have accomplished that was all ruined by the female titan. By Annie Leonhardt. She would pay deeply for this, one way or another. What could be worth all this death and destruction? Irin looked up at the sky and inhaled deeply before looking down at his hand. Should he? Should he transform and rush to kill Annie once and for all? Opening his mouth, he slowly brought his hand to it and prepared to. Don't even think about it. A voice said from behind him. Irin froze and slowly turned his head towards the source of the voice and saw that it was Eld who stood behind him, arms crossed and gaze fixed upon him. Eld, I wasn't. The brat was done thinking. Levi suddenly chimed in, placing a firm hand on Irin's shoulder. You'll get your shot. Just not now. He turned to his comrades before saying. Eld, Gunther, move out. The two soldiers nodded their heads before they too took off, ready to execute phase 1 of Levi's plan. A plan which the captain came up with in literally 2 minutes, mind you. This just goes to show one must never underestimate the Survey Corps and its soldiers. Here inside, looking at the 3 remaining teammates of the Special Operations Squad. Levi, Petra and Alu were all combat ready and didn't show the slightest of fear. Alright, let's get into position. Eren, you're phase 2 of the plan. Levi said. The female titan is here for a reason. To find and capture you. We're going to have to create a diversion, lead her into an area where there are not many people, but enough buildings to maneuver. I'm thinking the wall. Specifically, the wall that leads into the 2nd district. There she won't be able to escape. He turned to Petra and Alu. The 3 of us should be able to take her out. Watch out for her hardening abilities. I've seen them in action, and while Levi stopped himself, cursing underneath his breath before continuing. Well, as certain someone was able to break through it, I'm afraid our blades won't do much damage. Petra, Alu, I'm asking a lot here. I expect you to be precise, however. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, sir. Alu replied. Consider her dead, Captain. Petra added. Good. Levi said. Now Eren, you're going to be important too. You are going to be the most important asset of this strategy. And what might that be, sir? Eren asked. 8. Levi replied. Chapter 15. It had been a long and tiresome day for the members of the Survey Corps. After the successful expedition and capture of the female titan, everyone was overjoyed at the fact that we're going to be able to spend 2 whole days within the interior of Walsina. Many of the rich nobles in Walsina often looked down upon the lower class citizens form the exterior walls. Even when they heard about the Titan shifter, Eren Yeager and his shifting abilities, they only thought of the worst possible outcome. Titans within their walls, ready to devour all of them without regret or remorse. Everyone evacuate into the lower levels of the wall, that is the safest spot to be right now, instructed an MP officer, who looked just as frightened as the citizens he was literally ordering to get to safety. Damn it all to hell, he thought to himself as he heard the screams of terror run through his mind over and over again. Mere minutes ago, he had witnessed a family of 5 crushed by a piece of concrete, presumably from one of the houses the female titan had destroyed. Speaking of the female titan, she was still running rampant through the city, destroying buildings and fending off dozens of soldiers, often if not any time killing all who stood in her way. The MP officer turned to the recently graduated trainee squad he had been ordered to keep an eye on. Everyone. He began, swallowing his fear. F4 of you will go with these people and protect them with your lives, the remaining 2 of you will follow me, we're going to find the captain and regroup with the main force, he ordered. Zach, Fried, you to follow me, you wanted action, now you're getting a good dose of it, move out, he ordered. The 2 graduates in question, Zach and Fried, looked at their comrades before nodding to themselves and using the 3DMG to reel themselves upward and propel into the direction their commanding officer was heading. They took one last glance back at their friends, who had already begun escorting the group of citizens to the lower levels. Fried sighed, and Zach could only join her and shook his head. Can you believe it? Zach asked. A Titan. Here, in our city. What are the odds, right? I wonder what it looks like. Fried wondered. I've heard some rumors, but that's all. They say this Titan is a what they call it, an abnormal. She asked herself. Well, as long as we follow the sergeant, we should be fine, right? She asked Zach, only to get no response from the boy. She turned to look at him, only to see him staring at the ground below them, like he had just seen a ghost. Fried in turn looked down as well, wanting to know what got Zach so spooked. Needless to say, she shouldn't have looked at all. A giant hand reached out for her, and before she could recover from the initial shock, she was grabbed and crushed. Her ribs, legs, and partially any bone which was engulfed in the female titan's hand snapped and cracked underneath the sheer force of power. The female titan released the poor girl, letting her broken body tumble to the ground. And then she turned her attention to the other graduate, who had already begun to increase his speed by using up more gas than he should. He had reached his sergeant within literal seconds and looked at him with a terrified expression. Fried is dead, sir, he said, turning his head back. And the female titan is right on us. If we don't increase our speed, then we'll be killed. Why the hell isn't it eating anyone? The sergeant yelled, gritting his teeth. This all doesn't make any sense, and where is the damn Survey Corps when you need them the most? These guys specialize in killing titans, where the hell are dot? The sergeant stopped himself mid-sentence when 4 figures flew past them with incredible maneuverability and speed. Time seemed to slow down for the 2 MP soldiers as the figures' backs were completely exposed to them, giving them a good view of the insignia that was proudly printed on the back of it. The wings of freedom. The sergeant breathed out, landing on the roof of a broken-down building. It's the Survey Corps, he exclaimed, turning his head to his subordinate who had landed safely beside him. But why only 4 of them? He wondered. He shook his head, turning around and shooting his cable to another building's wall, successfully attaching them. Let them handle this retreat for now so we can meet up with the main defense force and take out that oversized boar once and for all. Roger's Ack replied, following his sergeant's example. Good luck you four, he shouted. As the two MP soldiers fled the scene, leaving the situation in more capable hands, the four Survey Corps soldiers surrounded a female Titan, standing on separate buildings and glaring daggers at them underneath their hoods. They all looked at one another and nodded. Jumping off their respective buildings, they shot their cables at the Titan's body and reeled themselves towards her, said for one soldier. With 3 individual skilled 3DMG users attacking her from each side, the female Titan had no time to harden all her skin at the right moment to successfully repel all 3 of her attackers. So, she would try a different tactic. She jumped up and spun her body around in midair, hoping to catch all 3 Solider off guard and dispose of them afterwards. Unfortunately for dear little Annie, she did not expect the soldiers to retract their cables and propel themselves upward, reaching her face, but worse of all, her nape. Eyes widening, Annie held one of her hands to her neck and the other tried to desperately reach for one of the soldiers. Said soldier shot his cables at a church standing behind her and reeled himself towards to it. Annie turned her attention to the soldier but felt herself lose balance all of a sudden. She looked down, hands still secure around the back of her neck, and saw that one of her weak spots had been compromised and cut. She held her balance, though, and slammed her fist down on the ground, sending a barrage of concrete and dirt flying upwards, severely crippling the line of free maneuverability the soldiers had. She noticed from the corner of her eye that one soldier was trying to make a run for her other leg. She was about to stomp down on him until the soldier was called back. Eren, stay back, we'll handle this, we cannot afford you to get captured, one of the soldiers shouted. The soldier who had tried to cut Annie's leg complied and used his gas to turn himself around. He then made a run for a building far away from the battleground. Annie's expression turned into one of anger as she ran after the Solider, the cut on her leg already having regenerated to a certain amount that would make it somewhat easier to run until it was fully healed. They had made a foolish mistake of calling out Eren's name so loud and open. Now she knew who to chase. She had already begun to catch up with said Solider and extended her arm, reaching out for the young Jaeger with hopes of finally completing her mission. It was then that 2 of the 3 soldiers who were with Eren appeared right in front of her and released a cloud of hot gas, blinding Annie's vision and making her stop dead in her tracks. Eren, make a left now, one of the soldiers ordered. The gas disappeared soon after and Annie was able to see again. She instantly turned her head left and spotted Eren trying to escape to the inner wall, probably to get away from her as fast as possible. She started running after him, ignoring the 3 soldiers who were right on her tail, not wanting to let her escape. Annie had her eyes focused on Jaeger when all of a sudden, he stopped and turned around, shooting his cable at her face and reeling himself forward. Annie kept on running and quickly reached for the cables, only for them to be retracted at just the right moment and fired at her legs instead. Eren came at her with such speed she had not seen him perform in his training days as a cadet. Eren successfully made his way under her and slashed away at both of her legs, sending her tumbling to the ground as she had not stopped running. Annie fell face first into the concrete and into some unfortunate residences of already evacuated civilians. She hardened the skin around her neck as she quickly rolled backwards, her legs still partially under her control, although she could not get up yet. Damn, who would have thought that having Eren spend so much time with the Survey Corps would increase his skills with the 3DMG so greatly. And had he grown as well? It had been a long time since she had last seen him. Eren, don't make reckless decisions and fall back, Annie heard one of the soldiers scold Eren. She could not see which, since she was too focused on keeping her nape safe and concentrating her energy on her legs in order for them to heal quicker. She deserves to die for what she did to those who perished yesterday, Eren retorted. Annie felt her armpits getting sliced open by 2 individual soldiers. Great, now she had 2 things to worry about. She opened her eyes and saw one of the soldiers pass over her. She gathered her strength and held her hand up and closed it, successfully catching one of the soldiers within her grasp. Eren, no damn it, she heard one of the soldiers exclaim. Annie smirked. She had done it, she had caught Eren Jaeger, albeit it be by sheer luck. Her legs having regenerated enough for her to make a short sprint, she quickly got off the ground and started running towards the wall. There was only one way she was going to be able to get out of here alive, and that was to climb that damn wall. And with Eren in her hand, she knew the scouts weren't going to risk attacking her. She would place Eren inside her mouth and climb the wall. Then she would escape and get back to her hometown. Everything was finally coming together. She looked forward to seeing the faces of her 2 partners in crime when she would return with their prized possession. DCH. She heard Eren mutter from her hand. Since when did Eren do that? Annie's thoughts were cut off by a pair of sharp blades cutting through all of her fingers, sending them flying in all directions in small pieces as her grip around Eren ceased to exist. She looked down at her hand, only for her to see someone standing in it with his hood removed and his face revealed. His eyes were calm, yet deadly. His posture small yet intimidating. "I don't know how you got past Saitama, but I'll make sure he won't get here before I cut off your arms and legs, and before you start thinking, yes, I am talking about your real ones." Captain Levi. What the hell was he out of all people doing in her hands? Eren should be there, not him. She heard them call out to him, and she knew who to follow every time. Unless their orders to Eren were intentional. And the Eren she had been chasing was not Eren at all. It made sense now that she thought of it. All of them had kept their hood on, preventing her from knowing who she was actually fighting. Although she made out one famine-sounding voice, the other two either remained silent since they had not said a word to Eren. Also, instead of going for her neck every time she left it exposed, they went for her legs instead. Then there was the gas trick they pulled on her. It all made sense. If they wanted to keep Eren so safe they would have never let him near her, let alone call him out by name. How could she have been so blind? "Looks like you're too shocked to make a move," Levi said, shooting his cables at her face. "I'll make it for you, then." He reeled himself forward and dug his blades deep in Annie's eyes, disabling her sight for a few minutes. Levi pushed himself off Annie's face and descended towards a nearby building. Using his gas to break his fall, he looked up at Annie with a glare and saw that she had already moved her hands behind her head again, protecting head nape. Even though Saitama is absent. Levi began, attaching his cables to Annie's right arm. "I will simply have to keep cutting until I render your every muscle useless," he said, reeling himself forward with inhuman speed and slashing away at Annie's arm. He propelled himself upward, hovering above Annie when he noticed three figures heading for her too. "Petra, Alu," he said, motioning to his legs. Petra and Alu, understanding what their captain was ordering them, instantly focused their attention to Annie's legs and attacked them simultaneously, cutting through her flesh as if it were butter. With the combined force of their skills and Levi's skills, they would be able to take out the female titan with little effort. They would secure this victory for humanity once and for all. Although one question remained: what had happened to the one who people though would secure humanity's ultimate victory? What had happened to Saitama? Could he have been killed? No. Petra refused to believe it. She knew Saitama, and he would not have gotten himself killed by Annie or any sort of falling debris. He would punch himself out of trouble, and he would not be defeated. Saitama was their hero, the one they all looked up to in a way, even though they just got to know him. Although he was dense and oblivious at times, he had a heart of pure gold. "Petra, stay focused," Alu said, flying past her. "I know that look. You're worried about something. Well, suck it up and focus on the mission, damn it. If he takes this hitch out now, who knows what secrets she might reveal," he said, slashing at Annie's legs again, only for them to harden, resulting in Alu breaking his blades. What the hell was that?" he questioned, looking at his broken blades. "No one told me she could do that." "Looks like she's trying to maintain balance," Petra added, glaring at her. "Captain, orders," she shouted. Levi looked down at his squad mates, shaking his head and letting out a tch of annoyance. "Increase your speed. Use up all of your gat if you have to. Just make sure she falls down," he replied, propelling himself towards Annie's arms again. "Increase our speed. But if we go any faster, then only the captain himself knows this technique. I'm not on the same level as him," Petra muttered to herself, looking at Alu, who looked just as surprised as she did. "Alu, are you ready?" she asked him. Alu looked at Petra, sweat dripping down his forehead. This was going to be a dangerous move. Only Captain Levi mastered the 3D MG to such an extent that he did not even need buildings or tree to maneuver himself. He reluctantly nodded his head and drew a new set of blades. "Go for the right leg, I will go for the left. This has to be swift and precise, double slashes only, and make sure to cut deep. I want to hear her bones crack." Petra nodded her head and attached her cables to Annie's right leg. Eren watched the fight between his squad mates and Annie unfold from a safe distance. He could not believe what he was seeing. The central market square that was bustling with people mere minutes before the attack had been reduced to a pile of rubble, death and gore. He gritted his teeth. If only he was allowed to transform, then he could defeat her together with the Levi squad. "Stick to the plan," Eren told himself, taking in a deep breath. "When her legs are disabled, I will transform and pin her to the ground and remove her arms from her body so Captain Levi can go for her nape." Speaking of Captain Levi, he was currently turning Annie into minced meat with every slash at her arms. Could this be the end of Annie Leonhardt? Eren wasn't sure why, but he wanted to at least know Annie's motives before she was taken into custody again. What could possibly be worth all this death and destruction? It was then that Eren's eyes widened in shock as she saw Alu lose his balance and fall to the ground. Why was he going so fast all of a sudden? Alu rolled a few meters, the cable around his 3DMG damaged and preventing him from making long-term jumps. It would work, but it needed repairs quickly. Aaron wanted to move from his spot and help him, but when Levi's orders echoed through his mind, he stopped dead in his tracks. Aaron, you're the bait, but not as you might think. We're going to distract Annie by using the same tactic we used on the expedition. However, this time there'll only be 4 of us. We'll have to be quick and our teamwork has to be precise. One little mess up and we'll all be in trouble, or rather, you will be in trouble, Brad. Should Annie capture you, there is no telling what she'll do. Aaron shook his head, trying to shake out the thought of being captured by Annie. He looked at the battle that was still unfolding in all its glory. Blood splattered everywhere, gas used to an extent that Aaron had never seen before. Levi seemed to be in his own world, only focusing on the task at hand, as if knowing exactly what to do at every moment. It almost seemed inhuman. But still Aaron couldn't help but wonder where Levi got his strength, his skill. Alu, on your right, Aaron heard Petra yell. He turned his attention to Alu and saw that he had almost run out of gas since he was beginning to slow down. He waved at Alu. Get over here and use my gas, he yelled. You need it more than I do, quickly, he shouted. Alu looked at Aaron and saw him flapping his arms around like some crazy person. Must be the Titan genes or something, he said, ducking underneath Annie's foot that nearly slammed down on him. He smirked and got ready to deliver the final blow to her leg until he felt himself suddenly stop midair. He looked at his gas containers and clicked the mechanism to release the gas, but quickly realized he was now in a whole lot of trouble. His gas had completely run out. Crap. Alu fell to the ground and landed hard on his back. Rolling a few meters away again, he came to a halt and slowly pushed himself up. His 3DMG was now rendered completely useless and he now stood a mere meter away from the female Titan. Said Titan suddenly opened one of her eyes, the blade that was inserted in one of them having probably been vaporized and destroyed. Alu stared at her in shock when she suddenly started limping towards him. He was completely frozen in place and could only keep on staring as she closed in on him. Crap. He thought to himself. Is this where it all ends? Even with Captain Levi on my side, I still die today. Alu, Petra shouted, hovering towards him. Get the hell out of there, now. Alu looked up at Petra and saw that Levi had already begun to follow after Annie and with one last and swift cut completely disabled both of her arms, making the fall to her side. That did not stop her from running, though. Petra increased her speed, using up the last remainder of gas she had left to reach Alu and literally dive into him, sending him tumbling backwards. Now Petra stood in the same predicament Alu found himself in. The female Titan jumped upwards and landed mere inches in front of Petra. The shockwave of the blast sends her flying into a nearby building, and an audible crack could be heard echoing through the area. Alu was also sent flying, but he fortunately landed in a cart full of cabbages. When the dust settled, Petra lay there, unconscious and bleeding out of her head and left leg. Alu's mouth hung wide open as he stuttered to call out to her. Petra. He spoke. No, this can't be. Petra. Petra. Levi could only stare at Petra's motionless body. He gripped his blades tightly and glared daggers at Annie. If looks could kill, then he would have died right there. Levi watched as Alu ran towards Petra and knelt down beside her, holding his cheek to her mouth. She's still breathing, Captain, he exclaimed. That made Levi stop dead in his tracks. She was still alive. That was a relief. He inwardly sighed, but regretted taking his attention off the female Titan, since she had already begun to run towards Alu and Petra. He needed to get them to safety. They had no ways of protecting themselves, both their 3DMGs were damaged beyond repair. Now Levi found himself in a predicament. He needed to stop Annie from advancing, disable her legs and prevent her from ever getting up again. He started to aim for her legs, ready to disable them for good, when he heard a loud thumping in the distance, slowly getting louder and louder, as if something was making his way over to him. He turned his attention towards the source of the sound, and his eyes widened. Aaron, in his Titan form, roared as he punched Annie on the left side of her cheek, sending her flying into several buildings. Aaron roared again, running towards her. Eyes filled with hatred. Jaeger, what the hell do you think you're doing? Levi asked, hovering beside him. He felt himself slowing down a bit. Crap, was she running out of gas too? He attached his cable to Aaron's back and reeled himself forward, landing safely on the side of his head. I know you're pissed, but Petra is okay. You hear me? She's okay. He spoke. Aaron ignored him, as if he wasn't even there at all. He leaped towards Annie again, but was kicked backwards by Annie's foot colliding with his stomach. Aaron stumbled backwards, landing on his back. Levi has safely jumped off Aaron. Crap. Damn. And whatever curse words could be said, Levi would have gladly said them. He was almost out of gas because of the long trip it took them to get here. And now this. Aaron was going completely berserk on Annie. No sign of Erwin or the reinforcements. He muttered to himself, looking around him. He watched as Alu came running towards him, carrying Petra on his back. "What are you doing, idiot?" Levi asked. "I can't just leave her like that. Captain, we have to retreat. We did our part and now it is Iren's turn. Her arms are disabled and her legs are all but crippled. Please just get Petra to safety. I'll walk myself to a safe spot if I have to. Just make sure she's safe," he said, looking at Petra. "I won't allow it. I won't lose her. None of us will," he said, turning around and glaring at Annie. "And where the hell is that freaking Baldy when you need him the most? Where the hell is Saitama? Where is our hero?" he shouted. Levi wanted to smack him right then and there, make him shut up and regain his posture. But in all honesty, this mission had taken a turn for the worst. One of his squad mates had been wounded and the other had no way to defend himself. He himself had almost no gas left. Perhaps enough for 2 more attacks that could deal some damage to Annie. If he could only get a good hit on her neck without her hardening it. "Captain Levi, sir," a voice called out to the captain. Levi turned his head. "Arlert Ackerman?" he questioned. He watched as the 2 soldiers made their way over to him, followed by a group of easily 40 other scouts, including Hanji and Erwin respectively. He nodded his head, turning around and looking at the 2 fighting shifters. Mikasa and Armin landed beside him and stared at the scene with wide eyes. "Is Iren winning?" Armin asked. "Depends on your point of view. Iren's lost control again and he's not listening to my orders." He looked at Armin and handed him his nearly empty gas containers. "Refill mine with yours," he said, crossing his arms. "I'm going to cut them both out. I don't care if they lose a limb or 2. They'll just regrow anyways." Mikasa glared at him. "Look out, incoming flying shifter," shouted Hanji, getting their attention and successfully warning all of them to jump away at the right time. Levi had grabbed Petra and Armin and Mikasa had grabbed Alu, much to his displeasure. They watched as Iren slowly got off the concrete, looking at his steaming hand. Annie slowly moved her arms again and balled her hands into fists. Looks like her regenerating powers were indeed far more supreme than those of Iren. Iren looked at her and balled his other hand into a fist and ran towards her. Annie, copying this move, also ran towards him with a balled fist. The 2 of them reeled their arms back and prepared to punch one another. Just as their fists connected, sending a shockwave through the market square. The Survey Corporation's members all stared at the scene in shock until both Iren and Annie were sent flying backwards. They landed into several buildings and had trouble getting up. It felt like they had been hit by a freaking boulder. "Could you 2 stop fighting? When has fighting ever solved anything?" questioned a monotone-sounding voice as a figure landed in the middle of the market square. "Now," he said, dusting his suit off with his red cleaning gloves. "Annie, you and I are going to have a serious talk about respecting your elders. That stunt you pulled was no fair. I had rocks in places I never thought they could get." Annie stared at the man in front of her and her eyes widened in fear. Crap, looks like she hadn't stomped hard enough after all. Chapter 16. Silence. Complete and utter silence. Unexpected, albeit not unwelcome. A silence before the storm, you could say. When the 2 shifters had begun their battle, ravaging the interior of Walsena and destroying many buildings in the process, they never expected a single human being to make them go dead silent and stand still. That is, if you could even consider said human being a human being. His power was unmatched, limitless. Human beings were absolute predators, and if an even stranger being and being that would become their predator would suddenly appear, they would adapt, learn its weaknesses, and kill it. Just look at the Titans. Humanity might be on the brink of extinction, but they have killed more Titans than they would have done 100 years ago. But now, with a new means of victory on their side, something they had presumed to be lost mere minutes ago, they could finally turn the tide and defeat the demons knocking at their door. "Well, look who decided to show up," Levi said, crossing his arms and letting out a soft breath of what strangers could only note was relief. In actuality, it was indeed relief. Saitama was still alive and kicking. Speaking of kicking. "Boy, Baldy, make sure you actually finish her off," Levi shouted at Saitama, who was standing between 2 15-meter class Titan shifters, ready to continue their fight at any moment. "Captain," Armin began. "We should concentrate our forces to take out Annie. With our combined attacks, she shouldn't be able to take us all out. If we can get Iren to come to his senses, we can have him pin her down so we can cut her out. Arlert." Levi cut him off, shifting his gaze towards him. "Obviously you seem to have forgotten who is standing between those 2. We're talking about a man who defies all logic and common sense. He doesn't need our help." Levi turned around and addressed his troops. "Everyone, stay clear of the area. Let Saitama handle them while we concentrate on finding any survivors." Alu came walking towards his captain, his hands covered in the blood of Petra. "Sir, Petra's condition isn't getting any better. We need to get her to a field hospital right away. She probably has broken her ribs and at least a heavy concussion. My gear is broken, but yours isn't." Captain, please take her to a doctor. I don't want to lose her, sir. He looked down at the floor and balled his hand into fists. If only I had been faster, then I could have done something to stop her from getting hurt. If only I hadn't been so clumsy, she would have still been unharmed. And you would have been dead. Levi retorted, shaking his head slightly before patting the man on his shoulder. You did good out there, but now I need you to do better. Get yourself to safety, take a ride on Hanji's back for all I care. A quick glare at Hanji made her think twice before speaking out for herself. Arlert, Ackerman, take Petra to a hospital right away. I will stay behind to observe. You mean double team Annie again? Mikasa thought, glancing back to see Saitama looking up at Irin. Do me a favor and take her down for good, Irin. I don't care how you do it, and I don't care who does it, she focused her attention on Saitama. Just take her down once and for all. Make her pay for all that she has done to us, to humanity. She closed her eyes and let out a sigh of mild annoyance. Looks like I'm going to have to depend on Baldy to keep Irin safe. She looked at Armin, who could only look back at her with eyes filled with determination. He won't fail us. Both of them won't. Armin re-encouraged her, holding Mikasa's hands into his own. Come on, we have to get her to a doctor right away. He said, moving over to Petra, who was being looked over by two soldiers. Okay, just put her on my back. And Mikasa, what are you doing? Armin stared at Mikasa in shock when she picked up Petra and in one swift movement, placed her on her back. Folding the girl's arms in a cross in front of her neck, Mikasa made sure she was strapped on safely before taking off, Armin following her seconds later. The rest of the Survey Corps soldiers all stared at the scene that was about to unfold before their very eyes. A human versus a titan. Man versus demon. No. God versus demon. Everyone move out, Hanji said, picking up Alu and haunching him over her shoulder, much to his displeasure. We search for wounded right away. We created this mess, so we'll be the ones to clean it up, well, at least until the MP gets of their lazy asses and does some work. Now let's move out and split up in 4 groups, she ordered. Her orders were received by a chorus of sir, yes sirs before the remaining members of the Survey Corps took off. Now it was only Levi left to observe the battle for himself. He only took a small portion of gas from Arlert, not wanting the new recruit to be left without any form of escape should Annie have come after him. As for blades, he had only 2 pairs left, so 4 in total. That should make do. Okay, you two, come out of your titan form and let's have a nice talk. We don't have to fight. Saitama instructed, holding out his hands in front of his chest. A lot of buildings were damaged after you two started fight. Before he could even finish his sentence, Saitama was grabbed by Annie and thrown into a destroyed building. Annie, not wasting any time, ran after him and started kicking the rubble several times before slamming her foot down once more, hoping this would have done the trick. If one stomp wasn't enough, she would just have to stomp more. Annie smirked, satisfied with her work. She turned around to face Irin, who had already got into an offensive stance, ready to take her on. Annie got into a stance of her own, but was suddenly swept off her feet by a red boot colliding with one of her legs, sending her tumbling to the floor. Said floor crumbled and Annie was now on her back. She took one glance at her leg and saw that the joint of her hip was completely dislocated. That would take a few minutes to heal. Trying to push herself up, Annie was sent flying backwards into a set of houses by a fist the size of a wrecking ball colliding with her face. Of course, Irin Jaeger. How could she forget the naive boy who knew of nothing of the power he held? Slowly pushing herself up, Annie looked down at her hip in awe that it had begun to heal, albeit slowly. She concentrated all of her energy on the dislocated bone, hoping it would heal before Irin got the chance to take her out. But before she could even stand straight, a fist collides with her chest and sent her flying upwards. The force of the impact made Annie close her eyes for a brief moment, but when she opened them again, she noticed the sun had become a lot bigger than usual. Also, why was she weightless all of a sudden? Looking down, her eyes widened in shock when she realized she was now hovering midair, possible 200 meters above the ground. She could see the city so clearly now. Even the walls, it looked absolutely stunning. Was this how birds view from the sky? Was this their everyday view? Were it not for the fact she was about to fall said 200 meters down, she would have gladly stayed up here for a few more minutes. She looked down and watched a flock of birds pass her. She smiled a bit. Quite the sight, isn't it? Asked a voice. She looked to her right and wasn't as shocked as she initially thought she would be. There was Saitama, arms crossed and looking up at the sun with a calm expression on his face. She nodded in agreement. And we just stop fighting. I don't mean to brag, but we both know how this is going to end. You did some pretty bad stuff today, and you did some pretty bad stuff yesterday. Heck, who knows how much bad stuff you have done. But if you could just come out of that titan body of yours, we can get this over with. Saitama said, closing his eyes. Unless you want to have a chat with Levi after I take you out of your body. Annie realized she was now beginning to descend to the ground. The impact should immobilize her for a good few minutes if it did not kill her. Was this the end of her mission? Eren was still in his Titan form down at the surface. Plus, Levi was down there too, and he didn't seem all that happy. Especially considering the fact she probably mortally wounded one of his squad mates. There were only two options she could come up with. 1. Fight, knowing it will do no good and get taken out by Saitama with just one punch. Or 2. Surrender and hope for a quick death. Her mission was a failure that she realized the moment Saitama entered the scene. It angered her how quick the tide had changed into the favor of the demons that lived on this island. She was told they were nothing more than that, demons. Well, if they were the demons, then the man beside her had to be the devil himself. It was going so well up until the point he appeared seemingly out of thin air and decided to aid these devil spawns. Her anger subdued after a few moments, Annie got out her Titan body, the upper half of her body, appearing out of the nape of her Titan form. You win, but I will not betray the people from my hometown. I'd rather die than to live one more day in a world where you exist, she shouted at him. Launching herself at the bald man, she reeled her fist backward and screamed as loud as she could, releasing all of her emotions, her anger, her fear, and yes, even her guilt into this one final attack. Her fist collided with Saitama's face, and his eyes widened for a moment before closing. Did she knock him out? Perhaps there was still a small chance she could win this. But now she had another problem. She would hit the ground in a matter of seconds, and it wouldn't be pretty. She braved herself and hoped her Titan abilities would even regenerate the damage she was about to take from this fall. She closed her eyes and outstretched her arms, hoping it would slow her down a bit. She thought back to her father and the training he would have her go through every day. She remembered how she once talked back to her father and injured his leg while training. That moment she realized she should never talk back to him ever again. For after that incident her training became even more intense. For a moment her life seemed to flash by, but when she felt a pair of arms wrap themselves around her waist, she sighed in defeat. Looking down at her belly, she saw 2 red gloves. Looks like he was still kicking after all. What happens now? She asked in defeat, lowering her head in shame. Will you kill me? Nope. Saitama replied. Then what will you do? Lock me up again? Annie asked. I don't know what I'll do. Saitama replied. But you need to understand a few things, Ms. Leonhardt. His voice suddenly became stern. What you did is unacceptable. Whatever you did and whatever reasons you have might be important to you, but you shouldn't get other people involved or put them in danger. I've met my fair share of people, monsters, heck even aliens who all hurt people because of their own needs. One even killed thousands of innocent people just because of some prophecy that he would get the greatest fight of his life. And opponent to match his strength. Annie opened her eyes and turned her head sideways, looking at Saitama. And was the prophecy fulfilled? Did that man find someone who could rival his power? She asked. Why the hell was she asking this all of a sudden? He did, I think. I don't know, but the guy was strong. He even punched me into space. Although I defeated him, it was a good fight. I haven't had a good fight in quite some time. But still a lot of people died back then, and those people died because of one man or alien's wish. Now that doesn't seem fair now, does it? How would you like it if people started attacking your home and killing people left and right? What if one of those people was your mother or father? He asked, clearly curious but also a bit angry at what could possibly be her reason for all this death and destruction. Heh, if only he knew. If you're trying to scold me then you best stop. I'm not telling you anything. My path is of my own choosing. Annie replied, chuckling to herself. Just get us down and lock me up again. The torture sessions with Levi will be a thing I look forward to every day. She laughed a bit to herself before closing her eyes. The future was turning out to be a grim one. If you're so sure you chose this path all by yourself, then why are you shaking? Saitama asked. If you're working alone then you should have nothing to worry about. But you're not in on this alone, are you? He looked down at the girl in his arms and noticed she had begun to cry. He sighed before moving one of his hands to her head and patting it softly. You need to face the consequences of your actions and live with the fact you're a murderer, but that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. How can you be so sure? Annie asked, looking up at him with red eyes. Do you think I wanted to become a monster? Do you think I liked killing all those people? There is blood on my hands and I can't wash it off. You don't understand a thing. Well then make me understand. Saitama retorted, staring down at her. If I don't know about the situation then how am I supposed to help? Before Annie could reply she felt a sudden shockwave going through her body. Loud cracks could be heard and she could see stone and dirt flying everywhere. It took a moment for her to realize they had finally made it back to the surface and that they were not standing in a crater created by the impact Saitama had made. She heard another crash and watched as her Titan body exploded into a piece of the wall, breaking it and sending several pieces flying everywhere when it hit the ground. God knows what would have happened to her were she still in her Titan form. She recoiled a bit when Saitama let go of her and almost fell to the ground when her feet made contact with it. Shakily she started to walk forward, not knowing why she was walking in the first place. Perhaps it was the shock beginning to settle in. Or perhaps it had to do with her being so high up in the air. She did start to feel a bit dizzy when she was so high up. All of a sudden, she was knocked back by a foot colliding with her chest. She gasped for air before a hand grabbed her by her hair and pulled her up. "Hello there," said a grim-sounding voice. When the blur that Annie was seeing faded away, she saw the face of none other than humanity's strongest himself. Great, this guy was probably not going to be as gentle as Saitama. "How are you holding up?" "Good." "Oh, that's great," Levi said, bringing his knee into her stomach. "You're going to pay for what you did here. For what you did to these people. For what you did to Petra." He retracted his leg and placed it in the ground. "Let's see how long it'll take for you to break when we leave the knives in your flesh instead of taking them out." Annie muttered a pair of incoherent words, but said nothing more when Levi threatened her by holding one of his blades to her neck. It was all over now. She had lost. Her mission was a complete utter failure. It was up to the other to finish the mission. Annie closed her eyes and let out one final sigh before losing consciousness. "DCH," Levi said, dropping her to the ground. "Looks like she couldn't handle it anymore," he said, turning his attention to Saitama. "Excellent job out there. Although I have one question for you, where the hell were you when she," he shouted, pointing a finger at the unconscious Annie, "was running rampant through the city?" "I was helping people," Saitama replied, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "People got stuck under some buildings and couldn't get out, so I helped them escape. By the time I got here I saw Annie and Eren. Oh, hey Eren, what's up?" Levi turned his head slowly to see Eren, still in his Titan form, glaring at Annie. He kneeled down and reached out to her, but stopped when Levi held out his blade to his hand, threatening to slice it off. "Hands to yourself, kid. She's defeated. Now get the hell out of there before I get you out of there myself." Titan Eren, however, didn't seem to care about orders right now as he continued to reach for Annie. Levi, not wanting to deal with another shifter at this moment, shot his cables at the Titan's face and reeled himself upward. Propelling himself behind Eren and attaching his cables to his neck, he swiftly and efficiently cut Eren out of his Titan body and threw him on the ground, shaking the boy out of his trance and leaving him with quite the headache. Eren held his head in pain before slowly getting up. He looked at his captain and then looked down at Annie. If looks could kill, then Annie would have not been unconscious anymore. Eren decided to speak up. "Sir, what do we do now that she's been defeated?" "We lock her up and this time we keep her locked up," Levi replied, running a hand through his hair. "I think it's about time we got some much-deserved rest. Today has been a rough day for all of us. Especially for him," he said, motioning to Saitama. "Saitama, sir," Eren exclaimed, running up to the bald man and saluting. "I thought I'd seen the last of you. When they told me what Annie did what she did I thought you were gone for good. I thought humanity was back where it started." He looked down at his feet and shook his head a few times before continuing. "But now I know never to doubt you ever again," he beamed, holding out his hand. "It is an honor serving beside you. With this victory we can finally get back at the Titans for everything they took from us. But can we really call this a victory, Jaeger?" Levi thought to himself as he observed all of the damage. Dozens of homes were destroyed and hundreds of lives were probably lost. But such if the price of victory, right? During the entire operation to capture the female Titan, over 100 soldiers lost their lives. Those numbers include Survey Corps member and military police personnel. During the time it took for the entire operation to be called a success, many actions had to be taken and many more lives were lost. The operation turned out to be a success, and with the recent recapture of Annie Leonhardt, humanity seems to have the upper hand in this war once more. For a long time, this seemed to be a faraway dream, an illusion one could say. But after recent events, such as the discovery of Eren Yeager's Titan shifting abilities and the strength of Saitama, humanity seems to be on the verging point of taking the fight to the Titans. Soon they might even take back Walmaria. And soon even the whole world. Although new threats lurk around every corner and new enemies appear to stop the advance, humanity will not stop until they have taken back what is rightfully theirs. Their homeland. The world. But sometimes the enemy can be right underneath your nose. Saitama shook his head when two Survey Corps members tied up Annie's arms behind her back and placed a piece of cloth in her mouth to prevent her from biting herself again. He started walking towards her but was stopped by Levi, who placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't. It's best if she's taken back into herself first. Obviously, she isn't going to be talking for a long time seeing as she's knocked out cold." He shot a quick glare at Annie. "But we'll get her to talk eventually. I just hope she doesn't escape again. Last time I am falling for the I need some fresh air lie." Saitama mumbled underneath his breath. "I'm sorry, what was that?" Levi asked, raising an eyebrow. You said something about a fresh air. What do you mean by that? He pressed on. I might have taken Annie out of her cell to get fresh air, she was hyperventilating. The small room didn't help. I had no idea she would transform. Heck, I don't even know how they do it. He replied. Levi's eyes widened and he stepped forward a bit. So, you're telling me, he said, now standing directly in front of Saitama so he could look him into his eyes with a look of pure disbelief on his face. That you are to blame for all those deaths. All those people died because of your mistake. He gritted his teeth. Do you have any common sense in that thick skull of yours? You need to think before you act, idiot. If word gets out, you'll be executed on the spot. Then we have to keep this a secret, said a voice from behind the two. Both Saitama and Levi shifted their attention to the origin of the voice and were both equally surprised to see Commander Erwin walking towards them with a small smile planted upon his face. Although Saitama miscalculated his plan, his intentions were of purest heart. Levi, I know this is hard to accept, but think of it as a necessary part in the key to humanity's victory. But you can't possibly tell me you just want to accept this and dot. You were going to torture that girl again. You tortured her, Levi. She's just a girl who's barely old enough to be called a teen in my eyes. He glared at Levi, causing the captain to remain silent. I do not stand for that. She needs to be punished, yes. She had once again proven today that she can't be trusted, but I feel like all this isn't all her fault. Call it intuition, but I feel like she's being forced to do this. So, you are saying we should just let the past be the past and move on? Levi asked sarcastically. Not at all. She needs to be punished for her actions. Lock her up or something, I don't care. Just don't stoop down to her level. It's just going to make things worse. Put her on trial and give her a sentence for 10 years. But you have to remember that she's young. Where I'm from, people are often given time to reflect on things. And if my hunch is true and someone is forcing her to do this, then we should be going after them first. Bastard kind of makes a good point for once. But, still, Levi thought to himself. But I do offer my sincerest apologies. Both Erwin and Levi looked at Saitama with raised eyebrows. Come again, they said in union. I apologize for my actions. I didn't think them through and people died because of it. This is why I prefer to do things alone. If possible, leave me out of any business involving lots of people in crowded areas. I don't want to be responsible for this ever again. Saitama said, his eyes serious and his fist clenched tightly. Erwin took some time to process Saitama's words, but eventually nodded his head. Agreed. Saitama, I must apologize for the things I put you through up until now. Although there is one thing, I must know, how far are you willing to go to assure humanity's survival? He asked. Levi looked at Saitama and then back at Erwin, curious as to what Saitama's answer would be. If people won't get hurt, then I am all in. Saitama replied. But people will get hurt. Erwin retorted, placing his hands behind his back and looking around the market square, which had now been completely destroyed. Look around. This happened way before you even arrived to save the day again. And even before you arrived here in the first place, people were already dying. As we speak, someone is currently getting murdered in the lower levels of the city or dying because of disease or starvation. People die and people get hurt every day, Saitama. You cannot blame yourself for not being able to save everyone. But what you can do is secure a better tomorrow for the people who are still alive as we speak. Erwin placed his hands on Saitama's shoulders and continued. You cannot be in several places at the same time. But remember one thing. What you did here, what you did yesterday, saved thousands of lives. Sometimes the death of 2 is enough to prevent the death of 100. Saitama raised an eyebrow at Erwin's words, but before he could reply, something else caught his eyes. Hey, why is there a titan in the wall? He asked. Both Erwin and Levi's eyes widened when Saitama said those words. Looks like humanity might be back where it started. In the dark. Chapter 17. In a way, some could describe the current predicament the Survey Corporation has found themselves in to be ironic. After venturing outside the walls and risking their lives on every expedition, it is only now that they realize that currently the very thing they were trying to destroy was already right on their doorstep. If Titans had penetrated this deep into humanity's bastion, then who is to say they aren't hiding somewhere underground, just waiting to strike at the right moment? And due to the severity of the situation, the Survey Corps was in search of even more answers. DCH. Can you please stop doing that? It's getting on my nerves. Levi's gaze slowly shifted towards his newfound comrade. Said comrade was currently bussing himself by trying to balance as many wooden tankards on one another, creating a small pyramid-like structure. And why should I listen to you? Levi asked sarcastically. You're ruining my focus. Saitama replied, not taking his eyes off his creation. This is the furthest I've gotten so far. So just let me dot. Saitama was abruptly cut off from finishing his reply, as one of the tankards he had placed on top of his structure had shifted due to some unknown reason, and due to gravity and perhaps sheer bad luck, now caused Saitama's creation to collapse in an audible fashion. Levi shook his head, trying to block out the sound of tankards hitting concrete floor. It was a good thing most of them were empty, said for a few drops of wine that spilled out of some. After everything that's happened, he's still oblivious to the fact we got lucky. The captain thought to himself. It was true for the most part. Due to the quick thinking of the Levi squadroneer and actually sticking to a plan for once, the casualties during the battle with Annie's Titan form were kept at zero. This was not the case for the MPs, however. And even though Levi absolutely despised the king's men, he had to give it to them. They gave it their best. Of course, it was up to the corporation S to clean up the mess in the end, just like it always comes down to in these kinds of situations. Though this was a situation no one could have seen coming. About 10 hours had passed since the initial battle between Hero and Titan, and due to the fact that problems were kind of piling up on one another, it was decided by Erwin that Saitama would be kept as far away from the wall Titan as possible and stay behind at the barracks. This, of course, due to the fact that the hero thought it'd be a good idea to try and see if this bigger Titan was any different than the others he had faced. It was only due to the quick intervention of a member of the church that Saitama didn't just straight out rip the Titan out of the wall. Apparently if it got into the sunlight, things would have been bad. Nothing much to gain after that. Even though Hanji really tried her best to get Pasternak to talk, he kept his foot down and refused to say a word. It would seem that the Order of the Wall had more information about the walls and their creator than they had initially thought. They weren't just a group of zealots who devoted themselves to their faith, but in actually perhaps a secret organization. This was, on both ends, nothing more than speculation, of course. So, are we just going to ignore the fact that there is a giant monster in your wall? It was Saitama who ended the awkward silence between the two. Levi turned his head to him and waited for him to continue. Even the captain himself was at a loss for words at this time. Up until now everything had been quite simple. Just get to Iran's basement and kill Titans. But now things just seemed to be getting weirder and weirder. Saitama took Levi's silence as his key to press on. I mean, he continued, placing his feet on the table he was seated at. I kind of got used to the whole giant humans wandering around outside the walls, but this kind of blew away my expectations. Stretching his arms and back, he added. Of course, this might be normal for some people who live here, I guess. It isn't normal. Levi replied, emphasizing the isn't part in his sentence. No one knows anything about the walls and how they were constructed. There wasn't really any reason for anyone to start digging into it either. You'd be shot if someone were to catch you break down a piece of wall. He sighed, running his hand through his hair. Although that probably wouldn't work on you. People tried. Saitama replied, shrugging. But bullets don't really faze me anymore. I don't like using tech and stuff. Your own sheer strength should suffice. Noticing the glare Levi was giving him, the capable Baldy scratched the back of his head and quickly added. Oh, of course that doesn't mean you guys shouldn't be using it. We don't really have the luxury to start training like you did to get as strong as you are right now. Levi stated, taking a sip from his black tea. In case you haven't noticed, we're kind of on the verge of extinction at the moment. At that comment, Saitama's ears perked up. I've been meaning to ask, he started, glad he is finally able to have a decent conversation without any interruptions for once. Where exactly are we? Levi raised his eyebrows. You mean where we're at right now or? Saitama shook his head and replied. No, as in. Where are we? What part of Earth are we at? Is it some secluded island in the middle of nowhere? Levi's eyebrows stayed raised and he pondered if Saitama might have hit his head somewhere on his way down from the wall. Levi knew they were behind walls, but where exactly they were located, he had no idea. There weren't really any other parts of civilization around to start asking questions about their whereabouts. Although this particular question did raise the captain's curiosity. I'm not sure if I understand the question, Baldy. But I can only answer your question with a question of my own. Why the hell do you care? Levi emphasized every word as his face drew closer and closer to Saitama's. Is there something you might be keeping from me? From us? His face now inches away from Saitama's, the captain continued. Well. Saitama moved his chair away from Levi, not appreciating the sudden intrusion of his personal space and replied. Just curious which continent we're on to be honest. You guys lack even the most basic technology like cars and phones. If you've invented steam, then why not use trains to get around easier? Levi rubbed his temples as he gulped down the remainder of his tea. I have absolutely no idea what any of you just mentioned meant. He placed his cup down and added. Where are you from, exactly? City Z. Saitama replied. Doesn't exist. Levi retorted. It does. Saitama sharply replied, having already experienced beforehand the dismissive nature of the people around him. I don't know what kind of place you guys get your information, but City Z does exist. It's been in the news quite some time due to recent monster attacks and an alien invasion that happened a few weeks ago. Of course, since you guys have no TV. You probably don't watch the news. Levi's brain was currently trying to process the strange terms Saitama had been spouting, but could not get his head around them in any way. Worst thing about it all. Saitama seemed to be dead serious about the whole thing. Levi did not take Saitama to be the lying type. Albeit sometimes unintentional, Saitama's actions have always provided the most plausible outcome so far. His heart is in the right place. Now he was just wondering if his brain was, too. So, where do you think you're from? Levi asked. Probably somewhere outside the walls by the looks of it. Saitama replied. Like Leonhardt. Levi remarked. If that's true, we might have to take you into custody as well. He added, although there wasn't any hint of malice present in the tone of his voice. You can try, but I did nothing wrong. Saitama replied, shrugging. I'm not some spy. I'm a hero. Although I have a hunch about what might have happened. And that being? Levi asked, curiosity raised once more. I was on my way to the local supermarket. There was a sweet bargain deal I didn't want to miss out on, so I decided to head early, but I think I overslept. Anyways, I was just on my way when out of nowhere this monster starts attacking the city. Some kind of worm. But like, million times bigger than a normal worm. I didn't really feel like fighting, because, you know, bargain day and all that. So, I asked him to leave. It didn't really appreciate my words, so I ate me. Wanted to punch my way out after it did, but saw a light while I was inside its guts, and though that was the exit. Then I end up here. The end. Saitama's long reply finally came to an end. It was unlike the hero to explain everything in detail like this, but sometimes it just had to be done. He was getting a little tired of always having to explain everything to others. So now that Levi knew, he could spread the word and eventually everyone would know the truth and no one would ask him where he was from again. It was a win-win situation at best. I'm starting to think sharing classified intel about Titan shifters might be the biggest mistake I've made yet. Or not? Eyebrow furrowed, Saitama asked. You don't believe me? Levi shrugged. To be fair, after seeing what happened these last 2 weeks, I'm not sure if you're either lying or speaking the truth. I have to trust my judgment. I don't think you have the necessary brain cells to come up with an elaborate lie such as this, so you must be telling the truth in some way. I'll just take your word on the fact you might be from the outside world. But giant worms are not something I'd expect the outside world to be populated with, so I'll pass on that one. So, do you believe me now or not? Saitama angrily exclaimed, jumping out of his chair. I don't like telling elaborate stories and yet here I am. There is a situation that needs your attention. Both hero and captain turned their heads to the origin of the voice that had abruptly interrupted their conversation, even though one of them knew it was bound to happen anyways, but it still sucked nonetheless. It was Alu, sweat dripping down his face as if he'd just ran a marathon from Wal Maria to Wal Sina. What is it, Alu? Is it about Petra? Any problems? Levi asked, getting off his chair, worried about the well-being of one of his squad mates. No sir. Petra is doing fine so far, just a concussion and a bruised rib or two, miraculously. I went to check on her with Eld and Gunther after you two departed for the barracks. He replied, slowly regaining his composure and breath. I've been ordered to inform you that Titans have breached Walrose. Levi's eyes slightly widened at this sudden revelation. Turning his gaze towards Saitama, he noticed the hero crossing his arms. Before Levi could say anything, Saitama announced. Yes, I'll have to fight on an empty stomach today. 9 hours after the supposed breach of Walrose, Au.Gordon Castle. The abandoned ruins of Au.Gordon Castle were somewhat of a mystery to most people. Some knew they existed, while others though they were just crazy myths. Turns are that for the members of the 104th and the 4 veteran soldiers they were not just myths. Having been forced to retreat from their base from the south of Wal Sina by the sudden appearance of Titans and now without any form of command due to the absence of squad leader Mike who had decided to stay behind and give them a chance of escape and hold back the Titan threat, they were at a loss of what to do. The trek they had made through the dead of night without not knowing if they would be snatched up by any straggler Titans that had already made their way further into the district was tense to put it lightly. Everyone had been on edge. The fact that only the 4 veteran soldiers were carrying their ODM gear only made the situation less plausible for success. But it had seemed luck was on their side after all. Because during their journey they came across the ruins of an abandoned castle. Having set up a temporary base and finally allowing the new recruits to get some R&R, the veterans decided to be on the lookout for any dangers that might show up. I can't believe this, Berthold. I can't either, Reiner. This development has put our entire plan to ruin. The two warriors from Marley had secluded themselves from the others, their excuse being that this all reminded them too much of the time they had to leave their hometown and that they needed to be together for a little while. This was, of course, a complete lie. But compared to the lies they have been telling and information they have kept to themselves for over 5 years, this could be considered a mild lie at most. Reiner, running his hand through his hair, sighed audibly. Just when we thought we got a good grip on things he shows up. He gritted his teeth, anger seething through his veins as he thought back to the first time they encountered the man they considered to be the greatest threat to their mission success. Captain Levi was already a pain in the ass, but now we've got a whole other problem to worry about. He looked at his longtime friend and asked. How are we going to get around this obstacle, Berthold? Berthold, sitting cross-legged opposite from his friend, took a sip from a tankard filled with water, gulped the entire thing down in one swift motion, and replied. I don't know, Reiner. I don't think we'll be able to do a lot when it comes to Saitama and his strength. Then should we wait for Annie and come up with another plan? Reiner asked. Reiner, I think we should try and take Eren away as soon as possible. Berthold replied, closing his eyes as he thought back to the time him and Reiner first saw Eren's Titan transformation. We still have to search for the coordinate and the founding, but now that we know Eren is a shifter, we need to bring him back with us. And the only way we can do that is if we can get Eren away from everyone. We've still got Annie, Berthold. She's tough. She can handle herself. And she'll help. Reiner said, noticing his words gave his friend some closure and put his mind at ease. She did her part, but now she's got to lay low. It's our turn now, partner. Reiner held out his hand to his friend. Berthold, looking up at his friend with wide eyes, reluctantly took his hand and let Reiner pull him up. Yeah, Berthold began, sniffing slightly. If worse comes to worse we'll team up on him. There's no way he can take both of us on at the same time. We'll pulverize him before he even gets the chance to act. With your colossal and my armored there's no way we can lose. We'll finish this mission and return home. Reiner declared with confidence. Having a moment of silence between one another, they let the words they had just spoken sink in. Their thoughts, however, betrayed their true feelings and fears. If he comes, there'll be trouble. Reiner's mind went in overdrive. I just want to go home and forget about this hellhole. Berthold hoped Reiner hadn't noticed his shiver. Reiner, Berthold. Both warriors turned their heads to the sudden intrusion as the door to the storage room they were just at slammed open, revealing a shocked and terrified Connie. Connie, what is it? Reiner slowly asked. How much did you dot? Titans, there are Titans outside the castle, and they're closing in. Connie cut Reiner off, motioning them to follow after him. We have to go, now. Announcement completed, Connie hurried back upstairs to regroup with his friends and comrades, leaving Reiner and Berthold to themselves once more. Both warriors exchanged worried glances between the two of them, but decided to find their resolve and try to survive through this ordeal. With no ODM gear at their disposal things would be a bit more difficult, but if it came down to the worst case scenario, they could always use their own powers to save themselves and make sure no witnesses survived the aftermath. Devils were just that, devils. They deserved no mercy and they would not be shown any. Making their way towards the top of the tower and meeting up with the others, they were shocked to see the amount of Titans that had appeared all of a sudden. What made this whole predicament even more unnatural was the fact the Titans were moving as if it were broad daylight. This was not normal. They should not be active at all. And the two warriors just couldn't accept the fact that these were all abnormal Titans. What is going on? Both warriors though simultaneously. Their question was answered the moment they finished asking when Connie pointed out an even more abnormal looking Titan walking towards the walls. And the moment they had laid eyes upon it, both warriors felt their stress level once again surge. Mouth agape and eyes wide open, they could only stare in shock at what they were seeing. They knew 5 years had already passed ever since they had left their home and traveled to this god-forsaken island, but they never expected they'd send him out of all people. It then became very clear to the both of them. They had taken too long, and now they had sent their boss to clean up the mess they had made. Board Chief Zeke had arrived. Any plans they might had come up with was now completely thrown out the window. Chain of command would now fall into the hands of a more capable warrior. And they did not like it one bit. If only Annie was here to see it. Stand back, rookies. The voice of Nanaba shook them out of their trance and snapped them back into reality. It's time to show of our ODM gear. And just like that, the four veterans leaped from the safety of the tower they were standing on and engaged in combat with the threat at hand. War cries echoed through the air as Jelger managed to slice the fingers off a Titan that had desperately tried to start ascending the tower, allowing Nanaba to finish it off with a blow to the nape, killing it instantly. The other two, Lin and Henning, followed their example and finished off the remainder of the smaller Titans that had been crushed underneath the weight of the one just killed by their comrades. It would take some time, but as long as they had the advantage of the towers and conserved their blades and gas, they might just be able to pull this off. So, south, correct? That is correct, Saitama. Although I would have liked for you to stay within the vicinity of the Survey Corps, there is no time to waste. You will travel the entirety of the wall and search for the breach. We will start in the southwest, while you'll start in the southeast. With any luck we'll be able to meet up with one another in a matter of hours. Considering your speed, it might even take us less than this. Saitama stared at Commander Erwin and then turned his gaze to the map he held firmly between his hands. His sense of direction wasn't the greatest, but he'd have to make do with what he had. If I come across any titans, I'll just take care of those along the way. He commented, stuffing the map in his back pocket. Although I'm not sure Levi is too happy with your rash decision. Erwin nodded but remained confident and replied. I have been keeping you on somewhat of a leash ever since you were assigned under the Survey Corporation's jurisdiction. I've come to realize that leash has been too short. So, I'm letting you off the leash, Saitama. Go and bring victory to humanity. Saitama rubbed his temples, sighing audibly while doing so. I swear, you're just like Genos. Always talking and talking. Just tell me what to do in one sentence. I like to get to the point straight away. Go and kill every titan that crosses your path. Killing is a big word. Saitama said, walking past the commander. If there are any more human transformers, I'd rather not end up killing the human inside. But I know that they usually look really weird, well, you know, weirder than the other giant nudists. He turned his head to look at the commander once more. But you at least kept it simple and short this time. I can work with that. And with that, Saitama bent his knees and launched himself off the ground, leaping what seemed to be at least 100 meters into the air and jumping right over the wall, shocking some of the Survey Corporation's members who had not actually seen the capability in action for themselves and leaving a big cloud of dust hanging in the air. Behind Erwin stood Levi with his, albeit a temporary all-men squad, watching as his newfound ally swiftly made his way out of the district they were at. We move for the Armitage district, announced Erwin to all the scouts present. Gather all the equipment and soldiers. We head out, now. Chapter 18. 4 hours after the supposed breach of Walrose, unknown location. Venturing outside the walls was somewhat of an uncommon occurrence for the garrison regiment. Taking into consideration the fact that 5 years ago a lot of garrison troops had their first experience encountering titans, none of them expected to be put on the front lines ever again. That was until they received word that Walrose had been breached. The moment they heard one of their superiors utter those dreadful words, all of the laughter and banter they had been spouting came to a sudden halt. Some hesitated, but when the order came for them to gear up and search for the breach, they all obeyed even if some experienced terrible flashbacks from 5 years ago. Families devoured, people losing everything. Han's thoughts drifted to that fateful day. The day he decided to turn tail and run away from the very thing he thought he would face without a hint of hesitation. He remembered Carla's expression, she was relieved, but even if Eren and Mikasa had not been able to see it, he did. Carla, ever so defiant even in her final seconds, was scared. She had been scared the moment Eren and Mikasa had arrived to try and save her. Hans gritted his teeth, trying to force the memory out of his head and to try and focus on the task at hand. But given the situation, trying to think about anything else but Titans was proving to be difficult. He turned his head towards his fellow comrade, Phil, as he yanked the reins of his horse to try and make it run even faster. Captain Hans, what's wrong? Asked Phil, wondering why his superior had been so quiet after departing. Normally Hans would be the one to break the ice in any uncomfortable or difficult situation. But now it seemed that even a joker as Hans could be at a loss for words. We haven't spotted a single Titan yet. Hans replied, focusing on the wall he had been tasked to inspect. Don't you think it's awfully quiet? Phil nodded in agreement. I don't understand it either. When Maria was breached, we knew where to look. Lots of titans in one place. He too turned his attention to the wall they were scouting and continued. But now there's nothing. There's just nothing. No screaming, not footsteps, just nothing. He closed his eyes in thought. This was truly a desperate situation. Either way, it just doesn't add up. Hans stated, sighing audibly. I hope this doesn't turn into the massacre we experienced 5 years ago. Lift your head up a little, Phil replied, smiling. 5 years ago, we didn't have a kid who could turn into a titan, remember? Hans, surprised by the sudden burst of confidence from his friend and long-term brother-in-arms, took a moment to register the words that had just been spoken. After a few seconds, he couldn't help but grin slightly and reply. That's right. And don't you be forgetting who taught that kid everything he knows. And aside from over-excessive drinking and showing up late for guard duty, what else have you taught that boy? Phil joked, earning an audible chuckle from the other soldier, Walter, who had been riding alongside them. Besides, should Eren not be enough, we still have the other guy. Ah, so you believe the stories? Walter asked, deciding to join the conversation instead of just listening. Everyone has been going on and on about him, but have either of you ever seen him in action? Both Hans and Phil did not respond, and thus Walter added. Well, me neither. But with everything that's going on right now, I think I'll just have to take everyone's word for it. Maybe the reason we haven't seen any titans is because he already took care of them. Phil questioned out loud, holding his chin. That would make the most sense. I mean, we've been traveling for a good 2 hours now and haven't seen anything yet. Hans shook his head and replied. Well, I'd love to believe that, it's just an easy excuse we'd all love to use when we go back and report our findings. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. But we must be prepared for anything. Phil and Walter exchanged worried glances and decided not to press on any further. If Hans was serious about something, it meant there was a reason to be worried. Iran, Armin, Mikasa, please be safe. 10-kilometer run every single day. That was the thing he actually dreaded the most out of his entire training routine. When he first started, he knew it would be tough. Physical exercise was grueling, but his overall condition had not been exactly average when he started. More like, below average. Muscle pains were one thing, but running out of breath and feeling your lungs burn was a very unpleasant and overall crappy feeling. I sure showed myself. Saitama said to himself as he continued running at a speed any normal human being would never be able to achieve without the help of high-tech gear. Taking quick glances at the wall he was supposed to be inspecting, he decided to jump up on top of it and take this opportunity to check his surroundings. I've been running for 2 hours now. Saitama muttered to himself as he dusted his clothes off. Walking towards the edge of the wall, he sat down and let his legs dangle off the edge. Couple of years ago I would have called myself crazy to run this long. But I guess I got what I wished for. Reaching into his pocket, Saitama took out something he had been saving for some time now. He had wanted to save it for a special occasion, but it was already a few days past its expiry date. Unwrapping the energy bar he had brought with him as a snack before heading off to the supermarket and before he encountered Deathworm, he placed the bar in his mouth and took a bite. "Igua's twist place doesn't waft any of the good food I'm used to," Saitama muttered, mouth still full of energy bar leftovers. He swallowed and then continued. Then I should savor this moment and oh, it's already gone. Saitama looked down at the wrapper in disappointment, realizing the bite he just took was a lot bigger than he expected. Sighing, Saitama threw the wrapper off of the wall and stretched his arms and legs. I do wonder how everyone else is handling the situation. If I remember correctly, the last time the wall was breached a lot of people panicked and died. Of course, this was to be expected. Even in a somewhat primitive world compared to his own, there was panic and death around every corner. And to think these guys were holding out on their own without a hero to protect them when they needed it the most was just crazy. But this was probably the result of having to protect yourselves without a professional's help. People try to become stronger and protect people, hero or no hero, they just do what they think is right. Saitama had to admit, even though a lot of people he had met seemed scared, he saw that some of those people had the potential to become the hero they all needed. Levi being a prime example. If he just changed his attitude a little, he'd look like the real deal to the public. But even if that were the case, he had his limits. Without his fancy equipment and skills with a sword, what else had Levi to show for himself? The question had been going around Saitama's mind for quite some time. He did not want to upset Levi and ask him directly, because deep down he knew Levi must have been thinking the same thing. He just wasn't on Saitama's level, and he never would be. But even still, this place was filled with heroes in Saitama's eyes. I guess sometimes even heroes need a break, Saitama said to himself, looking up at the sun which shined brightly onto his bald head. So, I'll be taking over from here on out. Having said those words, Saitama leaped off of the wall and landed on grassy ground once more and took off in a sprint. If there were indeed any titans inside the wall, he would make sure none of them ever got the chance to take a bite out of someone. Speaking of walls, if anything, the fact that there was an actual titan inside of the wall itself made Saitama wonder if there was more to them than meets the eye. While not as big and massive as the giant he had faced off against a few months back, it was still big. And from the looks of it, it wasn't just one. The walls were massive and spread for God knows how many miles. If every piece of wall was made of titan, then would that mean there were like a million of those colossal titans hiding inside the walls? As much as I'd like to put that theory to the test, the sun is still up and that pastor said that sunlight was a big no-no, so I'll have to wait until it gets dark. Oh, and bring some cloth to cover up the hole I would make. Putting aside the fact that sunlight was bad, imagine the amount of time it would take to beat every one of those big guys would be tiring. Saitama was really not looking forward to that day. He'd imagine Erwin coming up to him and trying to convince him with a motivational speech to break down the wall. Of course that would take too long, so he'd just accept either way to avoid Erwin's monologues. That man seemed to be really fond of monologuing whenever he got the chance. Saitama remembered the graduation ceremony he had attended. He remembered Erwin's speech, and he also remembered the amount of people that left when it was Saitama's turn to speech. Lots of people were probably waiting for him to say psych. Some people just weren't cut out for the job, like Saitama was not cut out for monologuing and sentences above 20 words. Everyone has their shortcomings. Some people's bones break easy and other people don't break any. Actually, giving it some more thought, that only really counted for himself. And speaking of broken bones. Petra, Saitama exclaimed, balling his hand into a fist and slamming it into the palm of his other hand. She's still in the hospital. I should really pay her a visit when this is all over. Maybe bring her a fruit basket too. Although he wasn't sure his fruit was going to help fix whatever she was going through now, it was at least a start. Vitamins are usually good for the body and bones, so he could at least tell her that if she ever questions why he decided to bring her fruit. He figured Petra was the kind of girl that would always ask someone their reasoning behind their actions. Maybe having someone else bring her the basket in his name was a better idea. I don't understand woman at all, Saitama sighed, rubbing his temples. If only Genos were here. He'd know what to do. He's smart and always analyzes things. I'm more of a act first, think later kind of guy, anyway. Taking a deep breath, Saitama added. But I guess it wouldn't hurt to think this one over again. Being a simple-minded individual had always been his way of living. Just do what you think is right and try not to upset too many people. Kind of just stay in the background and not attract too much attention. That was who he was. He didn't dislike it, but ever since he became an official hero, Saitama had begun to question his previous lifestyle. He didn't dislike being easygoing and worrying about today's problems, leaving the problems from tomorrow to tomorrow's you. Even while others took the spotlight for his actions didn't bother him that much. But a little recognition wouldn't hurt, now would it? Just a slap on the shoulder. A thank you or great job out here would suffice. Ever since he made his debut in this place, people had seemed grateful. Surprised. Scared. He didn't really know how to put it, but their reactions were different than the ones he had received back home. Mixed reactions make for mixed responses, right? Well, as long as people were happy and felt safe, that's all that really counts. At least Gino seems to be really grateful to him, perhaps a bit too grateful. His heart's in the right place. The hero was about to increase his already incredible speed once more, but stopped when in the corner of his eye, he noticed a familiar scene he had witnessed many times now. And having witnessed it, he knew what it meant. Trouble. That's Titan's steam. Saitama muttered to himself, coming to a halt. I guess I found the Titans. The breach will have to wait. I just hope I'm not too late. Brah. Blood splattered across his sweaty face as his blades once again slashed through the nape of another Titan. He let out an audible grunt when he noticed his blades had become dull. Switching them for new ones, he looked around him and took in how many Titans he had just killed. 4 left. Mike looked at the carnage he had made. It took some time, but he had done it. He had bought the recruits enough time to escape. He needed to leave this instant. He was down to his last pair of blades, and his gas wasn't going to last forever. He placed his thumb and index finger in his mouth and blew, whistling loudly in the hope his horse would return as soon as possible. I've bought enough time. Still, I am worried about that abnormal. It's just walking around, ignoring me. It took some time for Mike to realize that the abnormal Titan was there, but when he did, he had thought his situation had just become more dire. It was probably around 17 meters in height. Why it hadn't attacked him yet was nothing more than a miracle. A miracle Mike was happy to take advantage of. The moment he heard the familiar neighing of his horse, his spirit was lifted once more. He sheathed his blades and patiently awaited the return of his fellow equestrian companion. It was time to regroup with the others and find out what in God's name was going on. Wall rows had been breached, and they needed to seal said breach as soon as possible. Mike got ready to jump off the building he had been holding out on for what seemed like hours when his horse was almost near him. His resolve was as strong as ever. He would survive this. You came back great. It's funny how quick one's resolve can be shattered. The moment his horse came close enough to the abnormal Titan, it was subsequently grabbed and lifted up. Mike's eyes widened in horror. Why did it go for the horse? He watched as his fellow companion was crushed between the massive fur-covered fingers of the abnormal. It then lifted its arm backwards and threw the horse towards Mike like it was a mere pebble. Instincts kicking in, Mike was barely able to dodge the attack. Rolling off of the roof he was standing on, he fell and landed right in between the hands of an all-too-hungry, 4-meter class Titan. The Titan opened its mouth and brought its jaws down hard on Mike's legs, crushing them between its teeth. Mike yelled out in pain as he tried to pry his way out of the iron-like teeth of the Titan. Wait. Mike thought he was hearing things. Was there someone else here besides him? Another soldier perhaps? His thoughts were interrupted when the titan who still had him firm in between its teeth bit down once more. Blood splattered over Mike's face, his own blood this time, as he yelled out in agony. He didn't want to die, he just had to find an opening and dot. Didn't I just say to wait? Mike's eyes widened in horror when the abnormal hunched down on its legs and wrapped its hand around the face of the titan Mike had been so desperately trying to escape from. The moment the abnormal's hand fully enveloped the smaller one's face, it went splat and was subsequently crushed, causing it to open its mouth and in the process letting Mike tumble towards the ground. Tell me, what is that weapon called? The thing on your waist that flies around. Mouth agape and eyes wide, Mike could only stare up at the thing that stood before him. He had seen enough abnormals, but never one that could talk. How was it able to talk? It even spoke fluent sentences. No one prepared him for this. Titan were mindless beasts, so why was this one talking and behaving like it was a human being? The abnormal stared at the poor scout for a few seconds, waiting for a reply. When it got none, it awkwardly scratched itself behind his pointy ear and muttered. I'm certain we speak the same language. Perhaps you're simply too frightened. Frightened? He was scared out of his mind, terrified, even. Oh, I see you use swords too. I guess that means you know we reside in the nape. Reside in the nape? What was that thing talking about? No, it couldn't be. Well, I'll just take it back with me. The moment the titan reached for him, Mike's primal fear took hold of him and he turned himself away from it. Cowering in fetal position and holding his head with his hands, he waited for his eventual death. When he heard an audible click, his eyes shot open. He realized the abnormal had taken a piece of his ODM gear. He watched in horror as it turned around and started walking away from him. Now Mike was left with nothing but fear and regret. He didn't want to die here. But there was no way he was going to be able to beat that thing. It was too big, too strong and too scary. Why wasn't Levi here to begin with? He would have had no problem taking out this thing. Why was he left in charge of this mission? Only when a person stops fighting do they lose. His own words. The words he had spoken to Nanaba when she expressed her fears of defeat echoed through his mind. The moment he stopped fighting was the moment he let that thing take his means of fighting it. Determination filled his body as he reached for one of his swords and picked it off of the ground. As long as we continue to fight, he thought to himself, clutching the handle of his sword tightly as he readied himself to run towards the beast. We are not beaten. And thus, Mike screamed. He screamed with all his might, turning his defeat into his final stand of defiance towards their oppressors. Oh, the titan spoke once more. You can move now. And just like that, all of his hopes were crushed. In his act of courage, he had forgotten what stood behind him. Mike gasped, and instead of trying to fight, he tried to run. But with his damaged legs, 2 meekly steps were all he took before he was once again consumed by fear. One titan took hold of his arm, while another bit down on his legs again. And all the scout could do was scream and cry. All this time he was just the same scared little boy from all those years ago when he first joined the Survey Corps. So, you can speak. And even while he was suffering, while he was dying, that thing decided to mock him once again. Please, stop it please, Mike screamed in vain as the titans continued munching down on their prey. Mike's screams stopped when he felt a sudden gust of wind from behind. He had closed his eyes and hoped it would end soon, but the moment he felt the wind in his back, he opened them. He noticed his legs were free, if you could even call them that anymore, and that the titans that had been eating him were now all gone. Scrap that. They were up in the air, literally. Mike's eyes widened when a white veil blocked his line of sight. The moment he noticed it was the moment he realized he was not alone anymore. What followed were red gloves, a yellow tracksuit, and finally that magnificent bald head he had somewhat come to respect. Mike sniffed, and through the stench of blood and saliva, he smelled the familiar scent of something he had thought he had lost a mere moment ago. Courage? Yo. Mike looked up at his savior with teary eyes. Saitama, you dot. Unfortunately for the scout whose courage had just returned, his vision became blurry and he fell on his back due to exhaustion. Before his head would have hit the ground, it was caught by a warm and comforting embrace. Mike lay there, bleeding from almost every part of his body. His breathing had become ragged and he was slowly losing consciousness. It was unfair. Even after so many scouting missions and titan encounters, he still ends up dying here. He wanted to see the outside world too. Why was this world just so damn cruel? In the end, he was weak. He wasn't strong enough to even save himself. Man, did you do all that? Saitama asked, motioning to the titan carcasses. I didn't really know where to look, but you sure helped me out by creating that much steam. Mike turned his gaze towards the Cape Boldy and coughed. I was scared. He muttered, sniffing as tears once again began to stream down his face. I didn't know what to do anymore. He gritted his teeth and clenched his fist. I tried. Everyone gets scared from time to time. Even I do. But if everyone gets scared and runs away, who's going to be there to save everyone? You're still here, aren't you? Mike's eyes widened at his response. He wanted to say something, but found himself too weak to even utter a final word. Instead, he clenched his hand tightly around Saitama's and for what seemed like an eternity, he smiled. "You did fine." Saitama replied, taking Mike's hand into his own and squeezing it tightly. "Nice fight." And with those final words that gave the scout a boost of confidence, he closed his eyes. If in the end humanity's strongest warrior said it, then maybe it was indeed a nice fight. Either way, he had deserved a long rest. And he was going to make the most out of it. Saitama closed his eyes as he felt Mike's hand go limp in his own. Placing both of the soldiers' hands on top of one another, he said a quick prayer and then stood up. "Now this is a surprise." Saitama glared at the fur-covered titan that now stood before him. Clenching his fist, he spoke with a voice filled not only with determination, but also anger. "I'll honor his dying wish. You're up against me now, furball." Chapter 19. For what seemed like ages, in his time of being the carrier of the Beast Titan, Zeke had seen many horrible things. The wars he had fought in, the numerous innocent people he had murdered in the name of Marley, and the Eldians he had turned into pure titans, they all were just another piece of a bigger puzzle for his ultimate goal. When he had arrived at Paradis, he was surprised to see how much the Eldians behind the walls had advanced in terms of technology. Of course, they were less superior to Marley's, but still, being able to come up with a somewhat effective way to kill titans was an impressive feat. He had taught about what the Eldians could have done to improve their fighting chances, but never would have guessed they would take such drastic measures. But now Zeke wasn't too sure what to think. The person in front of him was unlike anything he had ever come across. The way he dressed, the way he talked, it all didn't add up. Was this man an Eldian, or was he something else? Either way, Zeke had lost somewhat of an advantage. His titans were all dead, sprawled across destroyed buildings or scattered on the ground in front of him. It somewhat angered him that the villagers he turned into titans had been such a disappointment. This man had just single-handedly taken out every single one of them. And this really angered him. "Saitama, was it?" Zeke asked the bald man who stood in front of him. Zeke did not like this one bit. If war had taught him anything, it was to be on guard at all times. No matter how insignificant or weak an enemy seemed, if cornered, they are even more dangerous than one would think. The aura this man gave off was menacing, and Zeke was finding it harder to keep his composure. "Are you perhaps from outside these wretched walls, eh?" Before he could finish his sentence, Zeke suddenly realized he was no longer taller than a building. Seconds passed and he realized that he was no longer in his titan body, but had been forcefully removed from it. He felt a strong pair of hands tighten around the collar of his shirt and realized he was now hovering several feet above the ground. Wide-eyed, he looked at his assailant. How? Why? Why was he outside his titan body? Mere moments he still had the upper hand, and now he was at the mercy of this new arrival. "You really need to shut up," Saitama said, his voice monotone, while his eyes pierced through Zeke's like a knife through butter. "I don't know what stunt you're pulling, but I've had it with you people running around and using this titan mumbo-jumbo to do whatever you want." Zeke squirmed, trying to pry himself loose of this man's iron grip. "Let go of me, you imbecile, you don't know what you're up against," he exclaimed. Reeling his arms back, he unleashed a barrage of punches onto Saitama's face. Each hit was meant to knock him out completely, but it just felt like he was punching solid bedrock. "I'm taking you to people who know how to deal with guys like you. I'm just a delivery boy right now. And to be honest, I'm fine with that. As long as it means I don't have to deal with stuck-up assholes like you." He hunched Zeke over his shoulder and added, "Don't try anything funny. I know you people like to transform whenever you get the chance." Zeke smirked slightly. If that were the case, then Saitama would know what comes next. Unlike Annie or Reiner, Zeke had experience with transforming more than once or even twice in a short period of time. Biting down on his hand, Zeke unleashed a large explosion, hoping to blow away his attacker and end his life in one swift move. He felt himself being wrapped in his titan body, its nape slowly closing itself around him to completely seal him from any danger. "I told you, you did not know what you were up against," Zeke screamed, his own voice resonating with that of his beast titan, booming through the air. This time he would make sure all that was left standing was him and nothing else. And after he finished crushing this little obstacle, he would make sure he found Reiner, Annie and Berthold next. "And I told you, you needed to shut up." For a second time Zeke was forcefully removed from his titan today. He could only watch helplessly as his titan's body went limp and fell to the ground. He felt blood drip from his nose. Damn it, his transformation was almost complete, and yet here he was, still at the mercy of this bald freak. Before Zeke could try to speak, or God forbid, transform a third time, he felt the palm of someone's hand collide with the back of his neck. Gasping loudly, he could only stare at his disintegrating titan body as he lost consciousness and think. Just what kind of monster had Eldia acquired? Saitama stared at the limp body of the man he had just knocked out. Maybe he should have just done that the first time. Then again, this guy didn't really give him any time to think because he had to yell right into his face. Letting out an audible sigh, he turned his head back at the body of the deceased Mike. Walking towards it, he carefully picked up Mike's body and slung it over his shoulder while holding Zeke underneath his other arm. "I'll make sure you get a proper burial. You deserve that much after all this crap." And having said that, Saitama sped off, hoping he would soon reach the walls again and be able to take a long nap. As the Survey Corps rode forward towards Au.Gordon Castle, the tensions everyone was feeling could not be described by mere words. After the grueling battle between Annie Leonhardt and Ehrenjaeger had been put to an abrupt end by the arrival of the hero Saitama, everyone thought they would finally be able to lay low and take a break from this endless fighting. Unfortunately, fate had other things in store for them. Erwin Smith knew his men were tense. After it had been revealed there was a shifter among the ranks of the military police, no one knew who could be trusted. Anyone could transform into a titan and turn on them, crushing their dreams of ever setting foot in the outside world. He had hoped that by sending Saitama ahead that it would have eased the dread looming over his men. However, it seemed to be having the opposite effect. Having now been ordered to move forward without the aid of their strongest asset, the scouts felt as if they had been forced to rely on their own strength once more. But was this a bad thing? A month ago, they were still risking their lives every day, venturing into Titan-infested lands, hoping to get a foothold and move forward one step at a time. Had Erwin's choice to recruit Saitama into the Survey Corps been a mistake? Had his men become reliant on this one man to take care of their every problem? "Commander, something on your mind?" The voice of Hanji's interrupted his deep thoughts. Looking at her, he simply shook his head and replied. "Just thinking about all that has transpired these last couple of days. As it stands right now, humanity has gained an unreplaceable asset to its cause." He looked down at his hands, which were firmly grasped around the reins of his horse. "I feel, however, that I may have handled the situation wrong." At hearing this, Hanji's ears perked. "Oh, how come, Commander?" she asked. Erwin let out a soft sigh and closed his eyes, humming to himself. "There is no need for us to head where Saitama is heading. We have seen what he is capable of, and everyone knows he is more than able to handle every threat thrown at him. Perhaps I was wrong." Hanji nodded slowly, beginning to understand what her commander was trying to explain. "I must disagree," she replied, holding her chin in thought. "Even though Saitama is the best option to take, we should not solely rely on him. He has only been helping us for a good 2 weeks now. I feel like we have been too reliant on his abilities. We have battle-hardened soldiers in our ranks that have risked their lives time and time again. To simply tell them to stand on the sidelines while someone else fights for them all on his own, even though that person is capable of doing so, it just seems wrong." Erwin opened his eyes and looked at her once more. Perhaps she was right. To take the chance of victory over the Titans from his men was a fate worse than death in many ways. The amount of fallen soldiers who risked their lives to secure a better tomorrow. Their sacrifices would be in vain if he just told them to lay down arms and await further orders if those ever came. "You are right on that part, Hanji. But I ask you this. If you were in my position, if you had the choice of ensuring the safety of all your men by having Saitama deal with every threat possible, considerably lowering the number of casualties, would you still order them to fight onward?" he asked, hoping that maybe someone else could change his perception on the current situation. Humanity had long suffered behind the walls. There would be more suffering should the Titan threat continue to exist. With Saitama on their side, they should be able to handle things quite easily. Hanji frowned slightly, not expecting her commander to ask these kinds of deep questions out of the blue. She, however, did think that he made a valid point. How would she have handled this situation if she were in command of the Survey Corps? Would she have made the same decisions Erwin had? Or would she have handled everything better? She really had no idea. Looking at the commander, Hanji finally replied. "I think that's a very difficult question to answer. Truth be told, I can't really see myself as a high-ranking officer. Being a squad leader already has its ups and downs. Being responsible for 20 people tops is indeed a challenge, but being in charge of the entire corps is something I can't really picture myself doing. So, to answer your question, Commander. Perhaps I would have handled things differently. But as of right now, the decision to lead the Survey Corps is yours and yours alone. And I would like to keep it that way." Both Hanji and Erwin turned their heads to the sudden voice of intrusion. The two watched as Levi caught up with them on horseback. He glanced at Hanji and spoke. "I would rather not be turned into a crazed scientist such as yourself. At least Erwin knows when it's best to kill Titans or capture them. Levi, are you still mad about that tiny incident we had a few months prior?" "I told you it was an honest mistake," Hanji replied, nudging the captain. "You almost cost me the life of one of my best men had I had intervened." Levi shot back, grabbing her by the end of her ponytail and pulling her face closer to his. You can stay squad leader for as long as you like. But the position of commander stays with Erwin for as long as he's breathing. Erwin looked at his 2 in commands and chuckled slightly to himself. Even though some days seemed grim, there still was time for some banter here and there. It's good to keep one's spirits up, for you never know when they might be broken down. And do tell me, Captain Levi, how would you have handled these last couple of days? I'm guessing you heard our entire conversation, so I'm curious to see your perspective. Hanji teased. Levi tsked and replied. I would have sent Saitama into Shiganshina already. The longer we wait, the more titans that are going to shop up. Of course, I'd want a front row seat to the show. Erwin had to admit that Levi, being as forward as he can be, did make a valid point. Perhaps it was time to switch things up and have Saitama do things his way. Alright, get back into position and focus. We'll hopefully arrive at Au.Gordon Castle before the next sunrise. He said, motioning for Levi to fall back further into the column of horseback riders. If these past couple of days had taught the commander anything, it's that you have to be weary at all times. Any one of those soldiers at Au.Gordon could be a titan shifter just like Annie or Iran. Either one of them could end up an enemy or an ally. They just had to figure out which was who and then see if they could be persuaded to join humanity in their struggle for survival. Elsa, darling, could you help me carry these vegetables inside? The young, timid-looking blonde-haired girl looked up from her book which she was invested in and glanced at her mother. Sighing, she got off her front porch and walked towards her. Coming, mother, she replied, walking over to her. Elsa was what you could call a regular girl. She did not have many friends ever since her family decided to move to a more secluded and rural area inside of Walrose. They had been living there for a good 5 years now. Her mother and father were honest people. They worked as farmers and always tried their best to support the family in any way they could. Her father would take their harvest into town and sell them, bringing in as much money as he could. The breach of trust had put a dent into their sales. With the city being rebuilt, markets were postponed, and clerks were told they had to go to another district to sell their wares. Her father did not particularly like this idea. The horses they used for pulling their carriage were getting older every day and could not travel these far distances anymore. Trust was already a challenge for them. But now that they were forced to go somewhere else, her father had not been able to sell any of their wares for a good 2 weeks now. This had caused them many restless nights, dreading the day they were forced to move out because they could not pay for their home anymore. Reaching her mother and taking the wooden crate filled with fresh vegetables out of her hands, she spoke. Mother, I do not understand why we still have so many crops to harvest. Father has not been able to sell anything, and we have been forced to eat most of them ourselves. Wouldn't it be better to try and get people to go to our home instead? Her mother's soft smile wavered, and she replied. I know the times have been hard, but we just have to hope trust opens up soon. We can't expect people to make the journey your father makes every week just to buy their food. People are lazy and are always looking for the easiest option to get what they need. We just have to wait and be patient. Elle slowly nodded but cast her look to the ground. She felt the soft touch of her mother's hand stroke her head. I just don't want to lose our home again. We won't, my dear. Your father will make sure of it. Before Elsa could reply, her father stormed out of their house, gun at the ready, shocking both women. Honey, get Elsa inside right this instant, something's coming. Her father quickly said, ushering them inside. I don't know what it is, but it's fast. Her father moved past them and took aim at something. Elsa was being dragged inside by her arm, having dropped the crate of vegetables in the process. She took a glance behind her and noticed a cloud of dust moving towards them at unimaginable speed. She heard the cock of her father's musket and watched as he took aim. He took in a deep breath and slowly squeezed the trigger. Elsa flinched when she heard the musket go off, the loud bang echoing through the area and sending her ears into a frenzy. She kept a straight face, but her eyes betrayed her true feelings. She was scared. Shit, it's still coming. She heard her father mutter annoyingly, having already begun to reload his weapon. Get inside you two, he yelled at his daughter and wife. Hey, did you just shoot at me? Both women froze when they heard the unfamiliar voice yell at them. Both turned around and were shocked to see a man standing in front of their father and husband. He looked interesting to say the least. His attire was something they had never seen before. What was even more interesting was that he was carrying 2 people with him. And one of them was clearly not amongst the living anymore. Who are you? What did you do to those people? Elsa heard father ask the stranger. She watched as the stranger put the dead person on the ground and replied. This man was killed just an hour ago by this man. The stranger replied, cocking his head to the other person that was hunched over his shoulder. I'm trying to get back to the Survey Corps to turn him in and return the soldier back to his family. Her father kept his rifle at his side but slowly lowered his defense. If that is indeed true, then your best bet is to head to Trost District and meet up with the military over there. We're just simple farmers, we can't really help with these kinds of thing. He looked at the body of the fallen soldier, his eyes softening ever so slightly. But my oldest son was also part of the Survey Corps before he passed away outside of the walls. They were never able to retrieve his body. So, the least we can do is take this burden off of your shoulders. He moved towards the body and added. My wife worked as a doctor's assistant before we moved here. She can clean the body and make it more presentable to the family. The poor boy is covered in blood. His family should not see him that way. The stranger slowly nodded, replying. That's really nice of you, sir. I hadn't really given it that much thought. I was just trying to get back to the Survey Corps. The father looked at the stranger and spoke. My name is Lutz. What is your name, stranger? Oh, I'm Saitama. Saitama replied. You're the Titan Slayer everyone has been talking about. Elsa suddenly cut in, wiggling herself out of her mother's grasp and sprinting towards Saitama. They said that you're the reason Trost managed to survive the Titan attack. Is it really true you can defeat Titans with just one punch? She asked excitingly, bouncing up and down. I was reading the newspaper and everyone was just going on and on about you. I got so excited after reading all of the stories that I really wanted to meet you for myself. She tentatively reached her hand out to him. Could I shake your hand, sir? Scratching his cheek, Saitama shrugged and grasped his gloved hand around hers. Nice to meet you, young lady. Hope you weren't expecting something with a bit more of a wow factor. Elsa shook her head furiously as she shook his hand. Nope, you're just as I imagined. Just a person who is trying his best to protect us. My name is Elsa, by the way. Nice to meet you too. Well, I'll be damned. Lutz said, walking towards Saitama. It is an honor to meet you, sir. Tell you what, take some of our vegetables with you for on your journey. I'd offer you one of our horses too, but seeing as you just moved faster than any horse I have ever seen, it's kind of pointless. He looked at the unconscious man on Saitama's shoulder and added. Thus put that murderer down for a few minutes and help my wife carry the body of that fallen soldier inside our shed. I'd do it myself, but my back isn't used to heavy lifting anymore. That's why I usually sell and my wife and daughter take care of the harvest. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Nonsense. Lutz cut Saitama off, cocking his musket. I might be a poor excuse for a farmer, but I am a pretty good shot. The moment this guy tries anything funny I'll make sure to restrain him. Besides, he seems to be completely knocked out, so he probably won't be getting up anytime soon. Saitama was about to reply but was once again cut off. This time by Elsa. My papa's really strong too, he'll watch over that bad man. Just let us help you take this load off of your back so we can at least say we did something to help the person that's been helping us. Saitama stared at the young girl. He was about to tell her no and turn back, but something about her eyes just seemed to get to him. They were like damn puppy eyes. She was freaking using those puppy eyes to get him to falter and agree on this. Well, tough luck, kiddo, because that's not happening. Okay. Damn it. Saitama placed Zeke down on the ground and looked at Lutz. Lutz had already taken aim at Zeke and gave Saitama a reassuring nod. Saitama nodded back and walked towards Mike's body and carefully picked it up. Alright, let's get this guy to your shed. He spoke. He watched as Elsa took point and headed towards the shed, her mother following behind her and trying to get her daughter to slow down. He had to admit that even though he was not expecting these people's help, it did felt kind of nice to be recognized and appreciated. The little girl seemed really excited to meet him. Heck, maybe after all this time he would finally receive some positive fan mail for once. He looked down at the body of Mike in his arms and thought back to the many people that had probably ended up as him. In his eyes Mike was one of the lucky ones. People usually get eaten by titans and there's nothing left to bring back to their family. Even Lutz had said the same thing just mere moments ago. This world truly was a cruel place. If only he had gotten here sooner, things might have gone differently. We're here. Elsa's mother said, breaking Saitama out of his thoughts. Just place him down on that table over there and I will take care of the rest. She said, moving her hand over Mike's hair and stroking it softly. You poor boy, so young. I hope you have found peace in the afterlife. You deserve that much. Saitama nodded and placed Mike's body on the table. He stretched his back and said. Alright, it's time for me to head back to the others. If you don't mind, I trust you to take care of him. Someone will come to pick him up, perhaps even me again. But right now, having to carry one body is more than enough. Elsa's mother looked at him and smiled, nodding her head in approval. You have nothing to worry about. I will make sure nothing happens to him. Hey, what are you? No, stop it, let me go. Bang. A loud gunshot echoed through Saitama's ears. He glanced at Elsa and her mother. Stay here. He moved with inhuman speed and had reached the front of the house in mere seconds. There he watched as Zeke had one of his arms around Lutz's neck while the other hovered mere inched away from his mouth. Stay back, you, Zeke threatened, placing his hand into his mouth. Make one wrong move and I will transform. I might not be able to transform fully, but I will make sure this old geezer dies alongside me from the blast." Lutz grunted, a pained look in his eyes as he gasped for breath. "I'm sorry, he was so fast I didn't even see him coming." "Shut up now, listen closely, I'm taking this old man over here for a little ride on that horse over there. If you follow me, I will kill him," Zeke said, glaring at Saitama. "I don't know where you got your powers from, but I will not let you intervene with my plan." He started moving towards one of the horses near the stables and added, "Stay there, I'm watching you." Saitama stood there, watching intensely as Zeke started to make his way over to the horses. He could theoretically just take him out again, but now that he had Lutz as a hostage, this changed things. Truth be told, he should just karate chop him and get it over with. But Zeke had his hand in his mouth, and he remembered that when Eren transformed, he always bit down on his hand too. So, if Saitama knocked him out, could Zeke still pierce his hand and transform? Was he even able to transform when he fell unconscious? All this thinking is really annoying. He just had to go for it. No second chances. He readied himself for a speedy takeoff and dot. "Please don't hurt my daddy," the voice of Elsa echoed through his ears. He took a glance back and watched as Elsa ran towards her father. He didn't do anything wrong. "Please let him go." Saitama held out his arm and grabbed hold of the girl, pulling her back before she got too close to Zeke. She yelled at him to let her go, but he knew that if he did, Zeke would transform and kill not only father, but daughter as well. "Listen, girl, if you want your daddy to live, just tell that bold asshole to stay back and to not follow me. I'll let your daddy go once I'm away far enough. Then he can just walk back home and you'll be a happy family again," Zeke said to her, having finally reached the horse. He awkwardly made his way on the animal, one hand still in his mouth while the other lifted up Lutz on the horse. Saitama had to admit he was surprised Zeke could even talk this clearly with his hand in his mouth, but maybe that was another Titan ability he just didn't know about. He watched as Zeke took off on the horse with Lutz. He let go of Elsa and was about to run after them, but stopped when he felt a hand grasp around his. "Please do as he says, Daddy, I don't want to lose my daddy." Elsa sniffled, tears slowly falling from her eyes as she finally broke down and fell to her knees. "I just want my daddy back, so I'm begging you, please stay until he can't see you anymore. Please stay until daddy gets back." Saitama clenched his fist as he got onto one of his knees and patted Elsa's head softly. "I won't let anything bad happen to your daddy. If you want me to stay here, then I guess I'll just wait for a while. But I do have to catch that guy one way or another. Then wait until it gets dark or until daddy come back, just don't let him see you. When he sees you, he will kill daddy," Elsa exclaimed, putting her arms around Saitama's waist and crying into his chest. "Until it gets dark, that's actually a pretty good idea, kid," Saitama thought to himself as he watched the silhouette of Zeke becoming smaller and smaller. This situation had gotten seriously out of hand. Damn it all. This was the last time Saitama would ever listen to these people when he was carrying dangerous criminals with him. "Elsa?" Saitama said, getting the girl's attention. "Those vegetables you guys were talking about earlier are starting to sound like a pretty good idea now." He finished as the silence that followed was quickly overruled by the grumbling of his stomach. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.